Chapter 946. Just when Lin Xiao was thinking that this zombie was too clean, and he didn't want to kill it, the zombie suddenly rushed out from the door of the stairwell and rushed towards Xiao Liqing at a very fast speed. In the blink of an eye, the zombie had already flashed in front of them, and then when it was 2 meters away from Xiao Liqing, bang, it fell again. Everyone looked at the zombie that fell on the floor with a subtle expression. It seems to run quite fast, but why did it fall? I don't understand, Xiao Liqing said speechlessly. Although this zombie's target was clearly rushing towards him, Xiao Liqing didn't feel any danger at all. He was still leisurely talking about the zombie. Because he couldn't feel any killing intent or threat, Xiao Liqing really couldn't be on guard against it at all. Lin Xiao walked over from behind the zombie on the floor, reached out his hand and grabbed the back collar of the zombie that had just climbed up and was about to rush towards Xiao Liqing again. Hey. The level 5 zombie waved his claws forward twice and stretched out his legs to move forward. Then he looked back with a blank face, because he found that he was fixed in place and couldn't move. There was no one behind him, so what was grabbing him? The level 5 zombie clearly felt that something was grabbing him from the back of his collar, so he reached back with his 2 claws. Sure enough, he grabbed a claw, but when he turned his head he couldn't see anything. The level 5 zombie looked back with a head full of question marks. At this time, Elmar curiously looked at the twisting zombie and said with a strange expression, "How did this guy escape our detection before? We obviously didn't feel his existence before, but he suddenly ran out." Then she turned to Xiao Liqing and teased, "He seems to like you a lot. Did he have a special interest in men when he was alive?" When they heard what she said, they understood that the special interest she said might be referring to sexual orientation. But the guy in Lin Xiao's hand could feel that his heart was like this. The same kind doesn't taste good. The level is too high to eat. Only this Xiao Liqing is a bit weaker, so he should be able to beat him. Being able to fight was equivalent to being able to eat. But this guy wasn't vigilant at all. He really wasn't afraid of them being stronger than him. Why was that? Lin Xiao stared strangely at the struggling zombie in front of him. There was no bloody aura on him. As a level 5 zombie, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to eat humans. But this guy clearly didn't have any blood on him. So why did he pounce at Xiao Liqing like he was really going to bite him? Suddenly Lin Xiao let go. She wanted to see if the zombie would really pounce on Xiao Liqing. They watched as Lin Xiao suddenly loosened his grip. As a result, he twisted his body and lost his balance. With a thud, he fell in front of them for the 3rd time. Everyone! How stupid! Xiao Liqing's first reaction was to ridicule him speechlessly. His second reaction was to remember. Wow! Miss Lu, why did you let him go? He now knew that Lin Xiao was invisible around them, so he didn't make a fuss just now. By the time Xiao Liqing was done cursing, the zombie had already jumped up from the ground. It pounced at Xiao Liqing. Xiao Liqing panicked and quickly dodged to the side. Bang dash! So after Xiao Liqing dodged, the level 5 zombie fell to the ground again. Lin Xiao said to Elmar, "He didn't kill or eat people." Elmar then said what she said. "The leader said this zombie didn't eat people or kill people. I was wondering why his aura didn't have any bloody aura. Don't tell me he doesn't want to eat me now, but just wants to play with me?" Xiao Liqing looked at the zombie that jumped up from the ground again. He had already retreated a few meters. Then he said to Elmar snappily. Elmar smiled and said, "I really don't know. Anyway, the leader said this zombie is very simple. He really wants to eat you. But we don't understand why it's so stupid. Haha. It's also our first time meeting this kind of zombie. It seems to be the same type as pesticide and Xiao Xiao." While Xiao Liqing was dodging, he pointed at the level 5 zombie that was chasing him and said, "Can I hit him?" Seeing that the other 2 high-level zombies didn't want to deal with this stupid zombie, Xiao Liqing didn't expect the 2 zombies to help him. Elmar smiled and nodded. "Sure, as long as you don't kill him." Lin Xiao crossed his arms and leaned on the railing at the edge of the roof. He watched the man and the zombie running around on the roof, while paying attention to the big hole 200 meters away. After Xiao Liqing got Elmar's approval, he immediately clenched his fists and turned them into stones. Then he suddenly stopped running and fiercely punched the level 5 zombie that was rushing towards him. Puff dash, the level 5 zombie was punched in the face and immediately cried out "ow dash," and was beaten back a few steps. Then this guy covered his face, suddenly screamed, turned around and ran. He ran. Suddenly, it turned around and ran to the edge of the rooftop. Before climbing the guardrail on the edge, it even fell down, but it quickly got up and jumped out of the building. Just like that, the level 5 zombie ran away. Xiao Liqing was a little stunned. He blankly turned his head and said to the others, "I just punched him, right? He really didn't use any big moves, right?" Wu Qingyue and Elmar nodded at the same time. Lin Xiao covered her mouth and couldn't stop laughing. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't have too much mood swings, she would have really laughed out loud. The smile on Wu Qingyue's face also became unpredictable, but it was a little hard to see clearly at night. He said, "Very interesting zombie, very fun. He came fast and left fast." Xiao Liqing thought, "Strange zombie." Elmar walked towards the place where the zombie jumped out, looked around and said, "He disappeared." His aura and the feeling between the same kind disappeared without a trace. Lin Xiao heard this, and also found that after the zombie jumped out of their sight, his existence and aura immediately disappeared. Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing also walked over and looked down. They really couldn't feel the zombie's aura. But this was also normal. Even Elmar couldn't feel it, let alone them. It was just that this zombie's aura hiding ability was very strong. He disappeared just like that. And when he came, no one could feel it at all. But thinking about the way this zombie appeared, and what he did just now. Chapter 947. Several people looked downstairs with a confused face. After confirming that the zombie had indeed disappeared, they felt a chill run down their spine. After confirming that the zombie had indeed disappeared, they looked at each other in confusion. Lin Xiao finally understood why there was no smell of blood on the zombie's body. If they had just set their eyes on a prey and were scared by the other party before they could even make a move. Elmar smiled and said, "This kid, when he came up just now, he was clearly very brave. Why did he run away after getting beaten up? Was there something wrong with his brain? Or is he lacking a brain?" Xiao Liqing looked at his fist and said, "I feel that his attack has a big flaw. Is he really a zombie? And a level 5 one at that?" Wu Qingyue looked through the binoculars for a while, then suddenly turned to look into the distance. Lin Xiao also saw it. There was a rotten smell coming from that direction. She patted Elmar and said, "You and Xiao Liqing wait here. Let's go take a look." Elmar froze for a moment, then immediately reacted. She knew that Lin Xiao had found something strange. They appeared. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Yes, you pay attention to protect Xiao Liqing." Although Xiao Liqing was already a level 6 earth psychic, these creatures were not afraid of the earth element. In the pitch-black pit, a place suddenly moved a few times. Then, a part of it suddenly caved in. A layer of dust rose up, and was blown away by the wind in the night. A black shadow jumped out of the hole, and lay on the side of the hole, not moving. Lin Xiao's eyesight could clearly see within 500 meters, and this was at night. If it was daytime, she could stand on a high ground and see a kilometer away. She stared at the creature that crawled out of the crater 200 meters away. This creature was the vanguard. It was as big as an adult gorilla. Its forelimbs and upper body were very strong and muscular, and its skin was like a layer of mud that had been air-dried. Its back body was much smaller, and its 2 hind limbs were short. Its claws were sharp, and even in the night, it faintly revealed a metallic luster. It had a monkey-like face on its round head, but its mouth was wide open, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. There were no eyes, and there was nothing where eyes should have been. This underground gorilla lay on the ground and sniffed left and right. It even stuck its head to the ground to sense something. After a few seconds, it used its 2 thick forelimbs to prop itself up. Woo woo woo. The underground gorilla made a strange sound with its mouth. It didn't sound very loud to the ears, but the sound traveled very far. After it called out a few times, a few of its kind immediately jumped out of the hole. They were slightly smaller than it. When there were 7 or 8 of them, the creatures suddenly rushed towards the building where Lin Xiao and the others were. "Looks like we don't have to go over." Wu Qingyue put down the binoculars and said with a faint smile. Then he suddenly raised his hand. Boom! A few bolts of lightning streaked across the sky and descended from the sky, directly striking the creatures that flashed towards them. The lightning bolts accurately struck those things. Roar! A woo! Roar! Several shrill screams rang out. The lightning attack is effective. Elmar's eyes lit up, and a trace of joy flashed across her face. Previously, no matter how they attacked with fire or water, it was useless. These creatures were not afraid of fire, and they could even swim and dive. They didn't expect Wu Qingyue's lightning attack to be able to injure these creatures. This was even more effective than the original bombs. These 7 or 8 underground gorillas moved quite quickly, and when they ran, they didn't make any movements, nor did they emit any aura. If one didn't pay attention, one wouldn't be able to detect their existence. Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao locked on to these creatures as soon as they came out of the hole. That was why they were able to silently rush to a place tens of meters away from their building and hit them with lightning. Lin Xiao silently walked towards the stairwell. She couldn't just jump down from the roof with a big belly. She was a pregnant corpse. She slowly walked down the stairs, and Wu Qingyue directly jumped down from the top of the building. He landed at the bottom of the building and didn't move. When Lin Xiao came down and walked past him, she purposely stepped on the stones to let him feel her. Then, Wu Qingyue walked towards the creatures. Lin Xiao didn't walk towards those creatures, but just followed behind Wu Qingyue. She stopped about 30 meters away from the creatures that were blasted to the ground by the lightning. Wu Qingyue had blasted 5 of these underground gorillas, and the other 2 were scared and ran back into the hole. 5 of their companions were paralyzed on the ground by the lightning, but they weren't dead yet. When Wu Qingyue approached, he saw the 5 underground gorillas struggling to get up. However, half of their bodies were charred, and their movements became much slower. Roar, roar. The largest gorilla stood up and immediately bared its teeth at Wu Qingyue. Then, its body suddenly emitted a layer of faint red light, and its body began to grow rapidly. It's going berserk. Elmar leaped down from the roof and stood on a telephone pole at the side. Not only did this gorilla start to glow, but the other gorillas also started to glow in red. Wu Qingyue raised his hand, and 4 thick lightning bolts immediately fell. Boom, 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 4 explosions sounded. Other than the smallest gorilla, the other 4 creatures were blasted into pieces by the lightning bolts. Looking at the 4 vulnerable creatures, Wu Qingyue felt strange and asked Elmar, "Didn't you say that they weren't afraid of bombs?" Elmar nodded blankly and said, "Yes, they weren't afraid." Wu Qingyue pointed to the 4 that were blasted into pieces and said, "What's going on now?" Elmar thought for a while and said, I think we should catch this one first before studying it. Are they afraid of lightning?" At this moment, the underground gorilla that Wu Qingyue deliberately left behind was already glowing red and pouncing towards him. Wu Qingyue raised his hand, and at the same time, his feet flashed. In an instant, he appeared a few meters away and stood there. Boom! A thinner bolt of lightning struck the body of the gorilla that was pouncing towards him. Bang! This time, Wu Qingyue controlled the energy in the lightning and only used 30% of the previous lightning. The underground gorilla was immediately beaten to the ground and stopped moving. Elmar jumped down and walked to the side. She found a remaining claw and picked it up. At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly flashed to Wu Qingyue's side, grabbed his shoulder and said, "Let's go, the main force is coming up." Chapter 948. When Wu Qingyue heard what she said, he immediately grabbed her arm and disappeared in a flash. Elmar and Xiao Liqing, who were beside him, also quickly left. Before Lin Xiao grabbed Wu Qingyue and spoke, she had already stored the underground gorilla, lying on the ground into the space, and threw it into the forest. Just a few seconds after they disappeared, countless underground gorillas drilled out of the hole. They were much bigger than before, and 2 of them were as big as cows. After the 2 huge underground gorillas came out, a violent and powerful majestic aura spread to the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, the 2 huge underground gorillas appeared beside the corpses that Wu Qingyue had blasted into pieces. As soon as the dozens of underground gorillas arrived, they quickly cleaned up the corpses of their clansmen that had been blasted into pieces. Then they brought them to the hole. As for the two largest ones, they were sniffing left and right and pacing back and forth, as if they were searching for something. After searching for a while, the two underground gorillas stopped. Then, they rushed in the direction of Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing. Wu Qingyue was concerned about the distance between him and Lin Xiao, so he retreated a distance and stopped. He raised his hand and struck the huge underground gorilla that was chasing him with lightning. Boom! Lin Xiao flashed to a remote position dozens of meters away from Wu Qingyue and watched the battle between Wu Qingyue and the huge creature. After the lightning struck down, it didn't hit the underground gorilla because it dodged it in time. It didn't seem to feel Lin Xiao's existence and only rushed towards Wu Qingyue. Perhaps it felt that Wu Qingyue's aura was too strong, or it was afraid of Wu Qingyue's lightning ability. The huge gorilla that was as big as a buffalo began to glow red, and its aura became stronger and more violent. Roar! This thing roared ferociously in Wu Qingyue's direction, then continued to attack Wu Qingyue. It was extremely fast. After disappearing from its original spot, it appeared in the sky more than 10 meters away in the next second. It waved its claws and slashed at Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue's figure flashed, and he immediately raised his hand to throw out a thunderbolt. Sizzle! The lightning flashed in midair and struck towards the underground gorilla that was pouncing down. Boom! Bang! The lightning immediately struck the underground gorilla, and it was blown away, landing on the ground with a muffled sound. Lin Xiao saw that it had landed a little close to him, so he silently dodged to the side and immediately distanced himself. Huff, huff, huff. The gorilla that Wu Qingyue shot to the ground lay on the ground for 2 seconds before getting up shakily and shaking its head. Lin Xiao saw that there was a black patch from its left shoulder to its chest, and there was a faint smell of blood. He could not help but frown. With Wu Qingyue's lightning strike, this kind of energy attack could shatter a boulder, weighing a few hundred kilograms into pieces. However, when it landed on the creature's body, it only left a superficial wound. At this moment, the underground gorilla shook its head and disappeared in a flash. On the other side, Wu Qingyue's eyes turned cold, and he immediately retreated from his original position. Bang! The place where Wu Qingyue was just at was hit by a red shadow, and the ground was smashed into a large pit a few meters wide. The raging red creature was standing in the middle of the pit. On the other side, another huge gorilla was chasing after Xiao Liqing. Xiao Liqing's level 6 Earth-class ability could not withstand the powerful claws of the other party. The half-meter-thick earth wall was instantly smashed by the other party's claws. Stone awls and earth spikes stabbed the body of the giant gorilla, but it did not even dodge. This was because the stone awls and earth spikes directly shattered when they hit the body of the gorilla. But the flesh of the creature was not damaged at all. Fortunately, Elmar had transformed into her beast form and swung her thick lizard tail at the body of the giant gorilla. Her claws were very sharp, but they could only cut through the opponent's skin and flesh. She could not even cut through the bones. Xiao Liqing did a roll and quickly rolled to the back of another mound. He awkwardly avoided the attack range of the gorilla for the time being. The gorilla's target was always Xiao Liqing, and it initially ignored Elmar, who had been attacking and harassing him. However, after being scratched by Elmar a dozen times, it became angry and roared at Elmar, who was covered in scales. Roar! Just as Elmar was about to launch another attack, it suddenly turned around and swung its thick arms at Elmarch. Bang! With a muffled sound, Elmar was directly sent flying. In an instant, she flew more than 20 meters away and fell into a pile of stones. Cough, 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 fuck. This is so hard to deal with. Elmar coughed a few times and immediately coughed out a few mouthfuls of dark blood. She cursed and quickly climbed up. After the underground gorilla casually sent Elmar flying, its body immediately emitted a red light. Then it turned into a red shadow and rushed toward Xiao Liqing's hiding place. Xiao Liqing cursed in his heart and suddenly turned to run. Bang! In the next second, there was a loud sound behind him. He turned his head and saw that the place where he was just standing had been smashed into a pit by the underground gorilla. To these two giant gorillas, Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue were now their prey. That was why they kept staring at them, and didn't care about Elmar at all. Even with Elmar, Xiao Liqing's side would still be crushed by the two of them. On the other hand, Wu Qingyue's side was evenly matched. Although his first lightning strike didn't have much effect on the giant gorilla, the second and third strikes had a different effect. Boom! Another thunderous sound. Wu Qingyue aimed at the wound on the underground gorilla's chest and shoulder and struck again. Roar! This time, the giant gorilla roared angrily, and its body became a little sluggish. Lin Xiao watched from the side, as if he was watching from the side. Seeing that Wu Qingyue's side was slowly pulling back the odds of victory, he turned to look at Xiao Liqing's side. These two giant gorillas were the level 7 beasts mentioned in Lin Feng's report. From the aura they emitted, they were indeed similar to level 7 mutated beasts. However, they didn't seem to have any abilities, and only knew how to fight hand to hand. Xiao Liqing was being closely watched, and the pressure was immense. A strong sense of danger shrouded his heart. He saw Elmar being casually slapped away by a claw. The sense of danger in his heart was even stronger. At this moment, as Xiao Liqing was preparing to dodge the next attack, he suddenly felt something tighten around his waist. Then the world spun, and he was being carried away. That's right, he was being carried away. Chapter 949. His abdomen was pushed against and his hands and feet were suspended in the air. By the time Xiao Liqing regained his senses, he realized that he was being carried, and was running at an incredible speed. Who is it? When Xiao Liqing realized what was going on, he could only see a blurry back in the darkness. He opened his mouth and asked. However, the other party didn't respond to him, and continued to run. Lin Xiao, who was watching Xiao Liqing being carried away, was speechless. Elmar didn't realize it at first, as she was focused on attacking the giant gorilla. After exchanging a few blows with the giant gorilla, she realized that the gorilla seemed to be a little agitated. Elmar then realized that something was wrong. She turned her head, and realized that someone was missing. Where's Xiao Liqing? Did he get dragged into the cave? The giant gorilla that had its prey stolen roared angrily. Roar! Then, it left Elmar behind and chased after Xiao Liqing's aura. At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly waved her hand, and a wisp of black smoke was thrown out from her palm. In the dark night, it flashed towards the giant gorilla without a trace. The energy in her zombie core had only recovered to about 10% of its original strength. She couldn't use the death fire. However, she could still control a little of the poisonous fog. She just couldn't release too much. Only a little. The wisp of black smoke that couldn't be seen in the night flashed into the gorilla's mouth faster than the giant gorilla. Since these things couldn't be destroyed from the outside, she would try to start from the inside. Although these things were immune to poison, Lin Xiao's black smoke wasn't just a simple poisonous fog. Her black smoke was similar to her death fire in that it could melt and devour anything. However, Lin Xiao wasn't sure if her ability would be effective against these things. Therefore, she used a wisp of black smoke to devour the energy of these underground creatures, just to test the effect. Lin Xiao looked at the giant gorilla, that she released the black smoke into chase after Xiao Liqing. She didn't ask Wu Qingyue to chase after it. She only gave Elmar an order to quickly find Xiao Liqing. On Wu Qingyue's side, the underground gorilla, that was injured twice by him, was much weaker now. It was no longer as forceful and oppressive as before. Roar! It had been blasted twice by Wu Qingyue at the same spot where it was injured. At this time, a hole had been blasted open, and dark liquid kept flowing out of the wound. The color of the blood could not be seen clearly in the dark night, but the smell was very strong. Lin Xiao pinched his nose, indicating that he didn't like the smell of this thing's blood. The underground gorilla was no longer attacking Wu Qingyue fiercely. Instead, it maintained a distance from Wu Qingyue and stared at him fiercely. His muscles tensed up, and he was on high alert. The red light on its body did not recede, making the charred part of its wound even more conspicuous. Wu Qingyue stared at it and raised his hand. Another thick bolt of lightning came crashing down. However, just as he was about to move, the giant ape suddenly turned around and instantly wanted to escape. However, it was already too late. A thick bolt of lightning descended from the sky with a dazzling light. Once again, it accurately blasted its body, and this time, it was precisely at the location of the wound. Woo! The giant ape let out a strange cry, and its body was blasted away. The surrounding trees and stones were sent flying far away. But even so, it did not fall. Instead, when it was blasted into the air, it quickly turned around and landed. Once it landed, it immediately rushed toward the hole that they came out from at an extremely fast speed. In an instant, it went into the hole. After it entered the cave, the other underground gorillas that were wandering nearby immediately retreated back to the entrance of the cave. Seeing that the giant ape ran so fast, Wuxia did not take advantage of the situation to chase after it. He saw that the surrounding danger had disappeared, and he said to the air, "Let's go find Xiaocheng. Maybe he can take care of the bigger one. Forget about this one." Although he was talking to the air, he was informing Lin Xiao and the others to change their location. Lin Xiao flashed to his side. At this time, in order to reach Xiao Liqing's location in time, she could only support her stomach with one hand and put the other hand on Wu Qingyue's shoulder. She let him carry her away. Wu Qingyue grabbed her hand and held it in his palm. Seeing that Lin Xiao had no intention of objecting, his smile deepened. The smile on his face deepened, and then he pulled her along and left in a flash. On the other side, Xiao Liqing, who was being carried, asked and found that the other party did not respond. His stomach was very uncomfortable from the jolting, and he immediately continued to ask the other party to put him down. And the other party's breath seemed to have been met before, and he actually could not remember who it was. But the other party still did not respond, and Xiao Liqing felt that something was wrong. He suddenly raised his hand to touch the skin on the other party's stomach, and it was cold. This person was not alive, so it was a zombie. Xiao Liqing was shocked, and immediately raised his hand to turn into a rock and hit the back of the other party's head. The strength of this hit was not very strong. At least it was not enough to break the back of the other party's head. He just wanted to scare the other party, so that it would put him down. Because every zombie had an instinct to protect their own head. And Xiao Liqing didn't understand why this zombie suddenly appeared and carried him. He didn't know if it wanted to save him, or if it wanted to take him away and then eat him. So Xiao Liqing's attack was also reserved. It would not kill him, and he could also get himself out of trouble. Sure enough, when his stone hand hit the back of the zombie's head, the zombie seemed to be stuck for a moment, and then suddenly flipped its hands and threw him out. After Xiao Liqing was thrown out, he reacted in midair and adjusted his posture to make it easier for him to land. As soon as his body touched the ground, he immediately bounced back to open up the distance between him and the zombie. At this time, he suddenly realized why this zombie's breath was a little familiar. Wasn't this the stupid and cute level 5 zombie from before? This guy actually had the ability to snatch him from the underground gorilla. That was a level 7 mutant beast. But this zombie obviously didn't give Xiao Liqing time to be in a daze. After throwing him out, it immediately followed and rushed over. So when Xiao Liqing bounced up from the ground, he only took 2 steps back before he was thrown down again. Looking at the other party's big mouth that was about to bite him, Xiao Liqing unconsciously touched the ground next to him, and without thinking, he grabbed it and stuffed it into the zombie's mouth. Ka-bang, a muffled sound, as if something had broken. Xiao Liqing then figured out what he was holding in his hand. It seemed to be a mobile phone. Well, in the apocalypse, abandoned mobile phones could still be seen everywhere. Chapter 950. When he realized that he had subconsciously picked up a mobile phone and stuffed it into the mouth of the zombie in front of him, Xiao Liqing almost subconsciously thought that the muffled sound just now should be the sound of the mobile phone being bitten into pieces. So he condensed his hands into stones and pushed the zombie that was on top of him away. Then he quickly stood up and retreated far away. When he stood still, he saw that the zombie in the dark seemed to have covered its mouth with its hands and stood up as well. Xiao Liqing squinted at the other party and found that the other party was digging something into its mouth with both hands. Hee. Although the night was very dark, Xiao Liqing's ability had broken through to level 6, so his night vision was still very strong. Although his vision was not as clear as it was during the day, He could still see clearly when he got close. Then he saw that the abandoned mobile phone he had just grabbed seemed to be stuck in the zombie's teeth. Xiao Liqing. He wanted to complain in his heart, but he didn't know what to say. Just at this moment, the zombie's two hands broke off the phone with a crisp sound. But Xiao Liqing just happened to take out the mini flashlight in his pocket and turned it on. He saw that the mobile phone was indeed bitten into pieces, and the screen was cracked into a mesh. But why was there a white tooth stuck in the middle of the crack? Xiao Liqing. Why is a zombie's tooth more fragile than a mobile phone screen? Didn't these guys gnaw on human bones very tasty? At this moment, suddenly a red shadow flashed in the corner of Xiao Liqing's eyes, and then a burst of air-breaking sound came. Xiao Liqing jumped in time, and then rolled on the ground. He did not stop there, but immediately bounced up from the ground, and quickly waved a thick mud wall in front of him. Bang dash! A huge red figure with a gust of wind rushed to the place where he was just now, and its two claws directly smashed a hole in the ground. Xiao Liqing turned his head, and found that the level 5 zombie had disappeared again. At this time, the underground gorilla jumped out of the hole just now and turned towards Xiao Liqing. Xiao Liqing saw that it had no eyes, but he also knew that it was staring at him at this time. The underground gorilla was fast, but Elmar wasn't slow either. As soon as it appeared, it immediately slashed its claws at the gorilla's neck. The underground gorilla tilted its head slightly in response to Elmar's attack. Then it turned around and clawed at Elmar. Seeing that the situation was not good, Elmar immediately twisted her tail and turned around in midair. Her body subconsciously became transparent and disappeared. However, the other party didn't seem to care about her becoming transparent and continued to grab at the air without any reaction. Elmar narrowly dodged its claws and dodged to the side of a lamppost to hide. At this time, Xiao Liqing had also taken the opportunity to put some distance between himself and the giant creature. The body of this underground gorilla was the size of a buffalo, and it was 4 meters tall when it stood upright. At this moment, its entire body suddenly stiffened, and then it began to open its mouth and let out some strange roars. Roar, roar, roar. Then it began to scratch its chest frantically with its sharp claws, tearing the skin on its chest. At this time, Elmar landed beside Xiao Liqing and stared at the strange movements of the underground gorilla. She was puzzled and said, "What is it doing?" Xiao Liqing shook his head. The crisis of being locked on had been resolved. However, he still looked around cautiously, worried that the zombie would suddenly come out again. As soon as the underground creature appeared, the zombie disappeared. It seemed that it was afraid of this thing. But why wasn't it afraid of Wu Qingwei and Elmar? Roar, roar, roar dash. At this time, the underground gorilla scratched its chest until it was bloody, and even its back was bent. What was going on? Xiao Liqing held the flashlight in puzzlement and shone it on the body of the underground gorilla. There was a large amount of blood flowing out of its body. The dark brown blood dripped onto the ground. Elmar flashed to Xiao Liqing's side and asked him, "Are you all right?" Xiao Liqing shook his head and said, "I'm fine." Elmar smiled strangely and said, "That zombie took you away because it was afraid that you would be eaten? It's so protective of its food." Xiao Liqing was speechless. This was not funny. Just as the two of them were talking, the big monster suddenly fell to the ground with a bang. It let out a strange roar while rolling on the ground. Is there something in its chest? Xiao Liqing looked strangely at the thing that fell to the ground. Its hands were still scratching its chest, and its legs were kicking wildly. Elmar nodded in agreement. "I think so. The others have started to run." Suddenly, she turned to look in the direction they came from, and said with some surprise. When Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao arrived, the huge underground gorilla was already lying on the ground motionlessly. Feeling a trace of Lin Xiao's energy coming from the underground gorilla, Wu Qingyue turned to look at her and asked, "You did this?" Lin Xiao slapped his hand away and walked closer to the underground gorilla. She raised her hand and controlled the black mist to expand in the body of the underground creature. Perhaps it had absorbed a lot of the creature's energy. The black mist became much thicker. However, under Lin Xiao's control, it expanded and became thinner. At this moment, the underground creature's chest cavity was already hollowed out. As the black mist expanded, its flesh and blood started to disappear. Soon, Xiao Liqing and Elmar saw the body of the underground gorilla, which was originally the size of a buffalo, suddenly deflate. When they heard Wu Qingyue's words, the two of them immediately understood why the underground gorilla suddenly went crazy and scratched its chest. Xiao Liqing shone the flashlight on the body of the underground gorilla and saw a black hole suddenly appear on its flattened back. A few wisps of black gas came out of the black hole, and the gas started to spread on the back of the thing, as if it had a spirit. After a while, the few of them saw the body of the underground gorilla disappear in front of them, leaving only its head and 4 claws. Lin Xiao waved her hand again, and the black mist flew back into her palm. The one that was released earlier was the size of a pinky finger. Now it was as thick as an arm. She walked over and kept the limbs and head of the creature. She was going to bring it back to study when Lung Xiantong came back. At this moment, Xiao Liqing suddenly clicked his tongue. "TSK, here it comes again." Then, he saw a figure sneaking out from the side and suddenly rushing towards Xiao Liqing. Alright, this fella saw that the underground creature was dead and came out to pounce on its prey. Chapter 951. Elmar grabbed the zombie that was about to sneak up on Xiao Liqing and pulled him away from Xiao Liqing by the back of his collar. "Don't move." Elmar directly released her aura, stared at the zombie and shouted. The level 5 zombie froze for a moment, and its struggling movements stopped. He turned his head and looked at Elmar blankly, then suddenly bared his teeth and roared at her. "Roar dash! I have you dare to roar at me? I can't control you. You're just a level 5 zombie leader." Elmar was stunned by his roar. After she came back to her senses, she raised her eyebrows and scolded him while gnashing her teeth. She didn't expect this level 5 zombie to ignore her level pressure and dare to resist her. What happened to the level suppression? How come it didn't work on him? Since he didn't listen, then she could only beat him until he listened. Elmar grabbed the zombie's clothes with one hand and used the other hand to slap the zombie's head with a paw-paw-paw sound. Roar dash, the zombie roared with each slap, and roared a few times after being slapped a few times. After a few times, the zombie also seemed to be angry. His hand suddenly grabbed Elmar's hand. Then he suddenly turned around and threw her hand away. Elmar was thrown to the side with great force. She was stunned for a moment, and then immediately turned around to continue to teach the zombie a lesson. As a result, after the zombie shook her off, it immediately turned around and disappeared on the spot. Then the 4 people saw that he flashed more than 10 meters away and fell down again. However, he quickly got up again and disappeared in a flash. Did we just let him go? Xiao Liqing felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. This guy always came for him. If he couldn't kill him, he should at least catch him and bring him back to the second base of the all-living base for training. Looking at Elmar's appearance, Xiao Liqing also guessed that Lin Xiao didn't want to kill this zombie. Although he didn't understand why, he always wanted to jump on him, and bite him made him feel a little uncomfortable. Elmar shrugged and said, "This guy is a bit strange. The leader thinks he should be useful to us." She meant that she was ready to put this guy into Lin Xiao's zombie army. However, he still needed training. He found a building to rest for the time being. It was not far from the underground gorilla's cave. Lin Xiao took out the remains of the underworld creature that she had devoured with the black mist and placed it in the middle of the room to study it closely. Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue shone their flashlights on the creature's head and claws. The claws and nails were black, and the surface reflected a layer of metallic light. Its 2 front claws were very large, and its palm was more than 20 centimeters wide. Each of its fingers was very thick. He looked very powerful and gave people a dangerous feeling. The remaining head was half the size of a bull's head. There was nothing on its face except for its mouth and nose. Its ears were small and pointed. The top of its head was smooth, and there were some protrusions at the back of its head. His appearance was ugly and strange. Lin Xiao felt that these things might have lived underground for a long time, so their eyes had degenerated and closed because they couldn't use them anymore. Elmar stood by the window and stared at the entrance of the cave. Those things had just escaped into the hole, and she didn't know when they would come out again. Wu Qingyue broke the leg of a wooden chair and turned the head over to look at it. He looked at the broken neck a few times. This thing's blood and claws carry the zombie virus. Don't touch it, Elmar reminded him. Although she knew that Wu Qingyue's information should have this, she couldn't help but remind him. Xiao Liqing said, "What the hell is this thing made of? For it to grow like this?" Lin Xiao stood by the side and looked at these things. Its claws were very long, and there was dirt accumulated in the gap. From its claws, it seemed to be very suitable for digging, especially its front limbs, which were relatively thick, and its palms were very wide. If they really came from the Earth's core, then there should be more than one kind of creature. But what was the reason for them to come to the surface? Could it be that there was a big change underground? At dawn the next day, some of the zombies that Lin Xiao had sent out returned with a small pile of zombie cores, or mutant plant and animal energy cores for her. Lin Xiao tested the hind limbs of an underground gorilla under the sun while everyone watched. The morning sun was very warm, but when it shone on the claws of the underground creature, they saw that other than the hard nails, the other parts of the claws began to swell. Poochie poochie, after the skin and flesh of the claw swelled up, the surface of the skin began to slowly bubble. Then these bubbles grew bigger and bigger, and when they reached a certain degree, they began to explode. The burst skin emitted a burning smell, and then the flesh under the skin began to melt. 10 minutes later, all that was left of the claw was a set of white bones and 5 sharp nails. So there's a reason why they are afraid of the sun, Elmar said with a look of understanding. Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue pinched their noses. Lin Xiao and Elmar weren't the only ones who could smell this stench. It was really very smelly, and it assaulted their noses. Lin Xiao went downstairs and took out a small truck. Then, he released the corpse of the smaller gorilla from the space and threw it into the trunk of the pickup truck. Then he let Jing Yan, Asan, and Asi drive the corpse back to the base. Although the sun is very harmful to them, we can't kill them if they don't come out. We can't blow up the entire underground cave. Who knows how big the underground cave is? Elmar said with a frown. Previously, these things weren't stupid. No matter how they lured them, they wouldn't come out during the day. And they didn't know how many of these things there were. Wu Qingyue, Lin Xiao, and the others stayed there for a few more days and nights. The cave was still quiet, and there was no movement. Lin Xiao ordered the zombies to spread out and search the surrounding 10 kilometers to see if there were any other situations. In the end, after searching a few times, there was nothing. These things seemed to have temporarily stopped moving and hid. And the level 5 zombie, that would fall a few times, when it ran would harass Xiao Liqing 3 to 4 times a day. This guy didn't know how to avoid the senses of the zombies. Every time they found him, he would already be less than 20 meters away from Xiao Liqing. During the day, the zombie's face could be seen clearly because the muscles were contracted, the bones on the face were protruding, and the eyes were black and sunken. It really didn't look good, but his eyes were especially bright and had the pure eyes of a baby. Every time they saw this guy come out, everyone would unconsciously stare at his eyes and ignore his face. Chapter 952. Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao stayed at the cave entrance for another half a month. When they found that those things didn't come out, they started to look around to see if there were any other caves that they missed. The main focus was on the distance between this place and the base of all beings. And that level 5 zombie, at this time, has been caught by Elmar and tied up. Yes, it was tied up with a rope. Roar dash, this level 5 zombie's hands were tied up like a fool. It didn't know how to bite the rope. It was really just a rope, not a chain. Although his hands were tied and his movements were restricted, he still reluctantly moved closer to Xiao Liqing, who was still alive. It stretched out its neck and opened its mouth to bite him. Boom dash, Wu Qingyue casually hit a level 6 mutated plant. It was a tree that could swing its branches. The branches were swinging like messy hair in the wind. When it saw Wu Qingyue and the others passing by, it tilted and wanted to wrap around them. In the end, Wu Qingyue used a lightning bolt to directly break the main branch. Digging out an energy core and holding it in his hand, Wu Qingyue looked around. Where is it? Everyone knew that when he was talking to the air, He was looking for Lin Xiao. Elmar raised her hand and pointed to a tree on the side. That tree. Wu Qinghua walked under the tree, looked up and smiled. Here. Lin Xiao didn't climb very high, she was on the shortest branch. Seeing Wu Qinghua give her the energy core of the mutated plant, she felt strange and lightly jumped down. Holding her stomach, she walked to his side and put her hand on his shoulder. Don't give it to me every time. This was what he had hunted, not hers. He didn't need to give it to her. Wu Qinghua gently smiled and softly said, It's not for you, it's for her. Lin Xiao knew that he was talking about little man in her stomach. After more than half a month, her stomach was much bigger than when she just came out of the base. Lin Xiao also felt a heavy pressure on his abdomen. Little man couldn't absorb much of the energy she was absorbing now. Little man was mainly absorbing the energy from Wu Qinghua's body. Every night, Lin Xiao could feel an invisible energy flowing from Wu Qinghua's body into her stomach. Therefore, Wu Qinghua would give her all the zombie cores or mutant energy cores that he had hunted these days. In the beginning, she refused because she had a large group of high-level zombies with her. If she wanted zombie nuclei and energy nuclei, she had plenty of them. She didn't need to take anything from Wu Qinghua. However, Wu Qinghua would always use the excuse that it was for the child and force it into her hands. If she didn't accept it, he would give it to Elmar or other zombies. Therefore, Lin Xiao didn't argue with him anymore. Although he accepted it, he would scold him angrily every time. After more than half a month, she found that the distance between her and Wu Qinghua had increased a lot. She could already walk 200 meters away. The energy in Wu Qinghua's body had also become much weaker these days. He glanced at the energy core in his hand. It was sparkling and translucent under the sunlight. Lin Xiao said, I have a lot here. I think you need to absorb more. The smile on Wu Qinghua's face was faint. His eyes curved into a pair of crescent moons. His eyes flashed a charming light hidden under his thick eyelashes. He said, I don't need it. These days he gradually felt that his ability energy was somewhat reduced, and now he clearly felt that his whole body was weak and heavy every night. But when he touched the female zombie's belly, Wu Qinghua didn't feel unhappy at all. Occasionally he could feel the little feet in her belly kicking his hand. Although the other party didn't have a heartbeat, and probably didn't have a body temperature when she was born. However, this vitality made him feel as if he was full of life. Wu Qinghua said he didn't need it for a reason. Right now he was unable to store the newly absorbed energy. These days, he had also absorbed the corpse cores. But after the energy circulated through his body, it did not gather in his brain. Instead, it directly melted into his blood and disappeared into nothing. He faintly guessed that this might be related to the child in Lin Xiao's belly. Since he couldn't store energy for the time being, he didn't want to waste time here. Fortunately, his original energy was still very rich. Lin Xiao frowned and said, You should keep it for yourself first. Then she let go of her hand and turned around to the level 5 zombie that was tied to a tree, and then he tied himself together with the rope. Wu Qinghua felt her let go of his hand. He felt a slight sense of loss in his heart. The smile in his eyes faded, and the corner of his mouth was pressed down a little. But in the next second, he put the energy core into his pocket as if nothing had happened. He knew that if he insisted on giving it to Lin Xiao, it would only make her unhappy. Lin Xiao walked in front of the level 5 zombie and felt that this guy's thoughts hadn't changed from beginning to end. He simply loved Xiao Liqing. There were 2 living people here, but he didn't have any interest in Wu Qinghua. He only stared at Xiao Liqing. Even if Xiao Liqing was more than 20 meters away from him, he still stared at Xiao Liqing with a covetous expression. It was like looking at a beauty, no, like looking at a roast duck, or roast suckling pig, roast whole sheep. He didn't know how this guy tied himself to the tree. Elmar just tied the rope in his hand to the tree. Lin Xiao stood in front of him and raised her hand. She held a glass of water in her hand. A transparent glass of water appeared in front of him. The level 5 zombie immediately turned his head and stared at the glass of water. The energy aura in the water made his hunger surge even more. He couldn't eat the meat in the distance, but the energy water in front of him could still alleviate his hunger. It was like humans eating meat and drinking nutritious juice. One was the desire for good food, and the other was just to suppress the physiological hunger. Seeing the glass of water, the level 5 zombie immediately calmed down. His eyes were glued to the glass of water, and he didn't look at Xiao Liqing. He opened his mouth and stretched his neck toward the glass of water. His mouth was still making sounds of awe. Lin Xiao didn't tease him, and directly poured the water in the glass into his mouth. While Lin Xiao and Wu Chengyue continued to inquire about the situation of the underground gorilla, there were people hiding in the cultivation base and outside the cultivation base. They took advantage of the night and hid a kilometer away from the cultivation base. They carefully looked over there with long-range binoculars. Did you see it clearly? Are you sure there's no heat source on those people? A figure next to him lowered his voice and hesitantly asked the person holding the binoculars. There's really no heat source. See for yourself. That person heard him say so, and immediately handed the binoculars in front of him directly to the other person. Chapter 953. The two of them used night vision long-range binoculars to observe a kilometer away from the Universal Life Base. They discovered that the people moving about in the area where the crops were planted were a bit mysterious. They didn't dare to get too close. It was already very dangerous to be more than a kilometer away. At this time, they discovered that the people in the cultivation base didn't have a heat source. There were many people outside the base without a heat source. They were the zombies. However, the Universal Life Base was outside the base's walls and within the safe zone. There shouldn't be zombies here. The person took the binoculars and was about to check. Suddenly, the person who handed him the glasses retracted his aura. He pulled his companion and ran in a panic. Let's go. Someone's coming. The person who was about to raise the binoculars immediately put away his things, turned around and ran. The two of them were very fast. They quickly disappeared from the building they were originally in. A few seconds later, the two figures appeared here again. Lu Jun stood in the room. After looking around for a while, he stood by the window and said to the fat girl fox, "There's a strange smell here." Huli looked left and right. She raised her nose and sniffed. She asked in confusion, "What's that smell? I've never smelled it before." Lu Jun's expression was calm. However, a sharp light flashed in her eyes. He said, "Just now I did see a shadow pass by here from afar. There must be something or someone here." As she spoke, she lowered her head and began to carefully examine the room. Huli stuck her nose out and sniffed for a while. She suddenly said, "If you say it's people, then they should have smeared something on their bodies to hide their smell." Then she sniffed outside the building. She frowned. "TSK, this smell can't be smelled outside. It was blown away by the wind." The smell was very faint. She could only vaguely smell it in the room. Once she went outside, it mixed with the other smells in the air and immediately disappeared. That was why Huli couldn't smell it from the outside. Lu Jun's face darkened. He walked around the room a few times. Then he said, "The people who came this time are much more cautious than Zuochen's group." There was no trace left at the scene that could identify them. Basically, nothing in the room had been touched. Even the dust on the floor had been cleaned. Not even a footprint was left. They even concealed their own scents. It was unknown whether they were aware that the base had the ability to distinguish between scents, or if they were just habitually prepared. Huli stuck his head out of the window and sniffed a few more times before he retracted his head and looked at Lu Jun and said, "Ask the leader to carefully check everyone in the base this time." From this position, he shouldn't be able to see the details of the cultivation base. But we can't ignore what they might discover. Lu Jun nodded and said, "We can't be careless about this." The two of them quickly left the place. One returned to the cultivation base, while the other went to the second base. Lu Jun returned to base 2 to find Xie Dong and told him about the incident. "Even the smell is covered?" When Xie Dong heard this, his expressionless face frowned slightly. As zombies, they were very sensitive to smells and smells. This was one of their strengths. But now the other party could think of a way to erase the smell. This was a great obstacle for them to find the direction of the other party. Lu Jun stood by the window of his office, leaning against the window with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He thought for a moment and said, "Is it someone from Zhuochen's group that slipped through the net? Otherwise, who would want to find out the secrets of our cultivation base?" Xiedong shook his head slightly and said, "I'm not sure if it's someone from that group that slipped through the net, but these people could also be from other sides. Because in addition to Haiqing base, the bases in the northwest and northeast are all trying to figure out the situation of our base. Now that there are so many new survivors in our base, we can't guarantee that there are spies from other bases among them." Although Xiedong and Yuan Tianxing would send people to find out the details of each new batch of people, the number of people coming in was not small. It was just that their investigation wasn't that comprehensive. However, with so many people being let in, Yuan Tianxing naturally thought of the existence of spies and spies. So they couldn't stop people from coming in, so they could only hide the secrets of their base. Thinking of this, Xiedong asked Lu Jun again, "How far is the other party from the base?" Lu Jun said, "At least a kilometer away, it's not far. But I can't see the situation in the cultivation base clearly. Using binoculars, I can only see all kinds of leaves." Xiedong thought for a moment, and decided to go there first to see the situation. "Take me there." Lu Jun nodded and said, "Okay." Then the two of them quickly left the place, after leaving the office. In the next second, they appeared outside the cultivation base, where Lu Jun and Yuan Tianxing had found them. "The smell is gone." Lu Jun sniffed, and suddenly found that the strange smell he had smelled just now had disappeared completely. It dissipated so quickly. Obviously, the gas had been specially processed before. It depends on who entered the base in the past 2 days. But I think since the other party has such a thorough anti-reconnaissance ability, they shouldn't take the initiative to enter the base in the past few days. Xiedong squinted his eyes and looked around, then said coldly. Lu Jun frowned, sighed and said, "We are not strong enough now. It's not suitable for these secrets to be leaked at this time." Xiedong suddenly held her hand and said, "Don't worry, I won't let the secret of the base be leaked." This base was a place where Lu Jun and her son could live in peace. It was also a place where Xiedong would follow and pledge his loyalty. This place meant a lot to both of them. So Xiedong didn't want to see the situation of the base fall into a disadvantageous situation. On the other side, 2 figures appeared in an alley outside the safe zone in the dark. Then they found a manhole cover and opened it. The 2 of them quickly went down and closed the cover. "Are you sure this disinfectant is effective? What if they let the dogs chase us?" One of them was a little uneasy and asked in a low voice. "Don't worry, this is effective against zombies. Didn't you see that the zombies nearby didn't react when we came here?" The other person said confidently. Their current position was already outside the safe zone, where there were zombies active. "Oh right, I didn't notice this just now." The person who spoke before was stunned for a moment before he reacted. "We have been discovered. We can't enter the base for the time being," the other person said in a somewhat annoyed tone. Chapter 954. Since we can't get into the base, why don't we go to Haiqing? Luo Yuxing suggested as they hid in the sewers. There were only the 2 of them, 4th-level adepts. When they'd infiltrated the base, they'd suppressed their disciplines and passed themselves off as 3rd-level adepts. Now that they were out of the base, the weapons and food they had wouldn't be enough to get them to China or Skyfire in the northwest. They'd have to figure out a way to get into Haiqing. They couldn't stay away from the base for too long. It was too dangerous outside. Wang Chong hesitated. "I'm worried they'll find out we're in Haiqing, or they'll keep an eye on it." After all, every entry and exit of a security base had to be recorded. Luo Yuxing thought it over. "What should we do? Head to Skyfire? That's too far. I'm afraid we won't make it." Wang Chong shook his head. "It's too early to go to Skyfire. The information we have isn't worth much. We haven't even gotten a clear picture of the base, and we've already alerted the enemy. Even if we go there now, we won't be able to get anything good." Luo Yuxing frowned. "And we'll have to go through a lot of trouble to get there. It's not worth it." Thinking of this, he stopped thinking, but then he thought of another problem. Right, those people we saw just now didn't have a heat source. Do you think they are zombies? Or humans? I've scouted around Base 1, and I haven't heard of anyone working there. Right now, those people are mainly working on the construction of the walls of the second base. Wang Chong narrowed his eyes and said, I also think it might be zombies, but the plantation is already in the safe zone. Why didn't they get rid of the zombies? Or did they give up on the plantation? Didn't they say all the land was closed to farming? Luo Yuxing thought for a few seconds. But why didn't they get rid of the zombies? What's the point of keeping them around? I'm not sure, Wang Chong said. But I do think they have a lot of secrets. They have a lot of secrets. Those soldiers who wear sunglasses all day also give me a weird feeling. Also, I can't enter the second base. As they were moving around in the base, Wang Chong didn't dare to bring too many equipment with them. Therefore, they did not use special binoculars to observe the base soldiers who wore sunglasses all day long. Therefore, neither of them discovered that these soldiers had no heat source on them. Those soldiers wearing sunglasses belong to the second base. I think if we can enter the second base, we should be able to find out something. The problem is that we can't even enter the first base of this base. Luo Yuxing said. Both of them felt a little depressed at the same time. The current situation was very disadvantageous to them. He didn't know where to go next. Going back to Universal wasn't an option, and Skyfire or the Chinese base was too far. He could only try to go to Sea City. At this time, Xiedong had already sorted out a list of people who had not returned from all the entry and exit records of the base. Maybe they didn't even enter our base? Or has he been observing from the outside? Qiu Lily couldn't help but ask. Yuan Tianqing said, there aren't many of them. If they don't come into our base to resupply, I don't think they'll stay outside for too long. But what you said is not impossible. I don't think they'll return to our base. Most likely they'll go to Sea City. I'll have the people in Sea City keep an eye on all the entrances, Xiedong said. He didn't care how these people had appeared. He just wanted to know what to do next. Yuan Tianqing nodded. I agree. Qiu Lily shrugged. I'll go out and track them. Maybe I'll find more of them. With that, she stood and left the room. She came and went as she pleased. The others didn't react, continuing to discuss their next course of action. By the way, what's the size of the zombie horde in the second base? Yuan Tianqing asked Xiedong. He only knew that other than Lin Xiao, there were Qiu Lily, Elmar and Lin Kuei. There were 12 kings of the first rank of the 6th rank. But he didn't know how many level 5, 4, and 3 kings there were. The soldiers wearing sunglasses and masks that occasionally passed by the base every day were only level 3. There were no level 4 zombies among them. Xiedong said, there are more than 100 level 5 leaders, more than 500 level 4 zombies, and more than 2,000 level 3 zombies. We've divided them into 2 groups, and they've passed the training. The third group is currently in training. With the blood control of the leader, they're very obedient. A group consisted of 1,000 to 1,500 people, but Lin Xiao had only arranged 1,000 to 1,200 zombies to form a group. So the 2 zombie groups were being suppressed by Qiu Lily and Elmarch. 5 level 1 kings were sent to assist them. Lin Kuei hadn't been recruited by Lin Xiao yet. As for the level 3 zombies, they weren't recruited by Lin Xiao either. They were just left to be raised, and any evolved ones would be caught and trained before being recruited. Although it was just 2 normal groups, they were zombies, and their collective strength was not something humans could compare to. Yuan Tianqing and Lin Feng looked at each other and nodded. The number is less than we thought. According to the large number of zombies that Lin Xiao had brought back, as well as the ones that had been driven to Mount Wu to hide, there were at least 80,000, if not 100,000. They didn't expect that Lin Xiao had recruited only 2,000 to 3,000 people. Xiedong said, you all know that these low-level zombies didn't have much intelligence before. Even though the leader has modified them with his blood, the leader still doesn't feel at ease. After all, the instincts of zombies are still very troublesome. Many who didn't obey were killed directly. If they didn't obey now, they might die in the hands of others in the future. It was better to be cleaned up earlier, and at least they could contribute a zombie core. Yuan Tianqing nodded. That's right. Lin Feng said, we have to guard the secret of the second base. At the very least, we have to prevent them from being targeted by the other bases for the next 10 or 20 years. Xiedong nodded and didn't say anything. Chapter 955. Xiao Lily appeared on the wall of the base, following the smell in the air while sensing. Although Xiedong said that the other party used an odor eliminator, the smell might have dissipated. But as long as the effect of the odor eliminator wore off, she would be able to distinguish the smell in the air within 10 kilometers. When Lin Xiao was not in the base, she would feel that it was her fault if anything happened. If the situation at the cultivation base was really leaked, then she would be a little embarrassed. But this time, no one thought that the person who came to investigate would use an odor eliminator. On the other side, Lin Xiao led the zombies to carefully sense the smell of the underground creatures. Standing on the roof of a building, Lin Xiao suddenly trembled. She turned her head at the same time as Wu Qingyue, and there was a strong pressure coming from that direction. It's coming! Wu Qingyue's eyes flashed. Elmar and the other zombies also felt it, and immediately went into a state of alert. But no one let go of the level 5 zombie that was entangled on the tree. Lin Xiao suddenly turned around and took out a glass of water. Then she cut her finger and squeezed a drop of blood into the water. Roar dash! When her blood appeared in the air, the level 5 zombie immediately exploded. His whole body tensed up and went into a state of alert. He stared at Lin Xiao and roared as a warning. Lin Xiao didn't say anything. She directly raised her hand and held his chin with one hand, making him open his mouth. Her other hand poured the water, mixed with her blood, into his mouth. Wu dash! The level 5 zombie was scared stiff and immediately let out a frightened cry. But because his mouth was blocked by Lin Xiao, he could only make half a sound. Gulp gulp. Lin Xiao poured 70% of the water in the glass into his mouth, the rest flowed out. Then she let go of his hand and took a few steps back, then immediately flashed to Wu Qingyue's side. She pressed him down. Go check it out. Although the smell was very strong, she didn't want to avoid it. Letting Wu Qingyue go check it out was just for a look. She didn't want to face it directly. After Wu Qingyue pulled Lin Xiao away, the other zombies also left. Before Xiao Liqing left, he turned his head and glanced at the level 5 zombie. He didn't understand why the female zombie leader left him here. After they left, the level 5 zombie's body shook. Then its face changed, and it roared ferociously. Roar! His whole body struggled, and the energy in his body began to overflow violently. It directly condensed into energy blades, and very quickly, the ropes on his body were cut. Roar, 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 roar. Ah! But in the next second, the zombie rolled on the ground and began to roll. His entire body twitched as he curled up into a ball for a moment, then sprang up in the next moment. His 4 limbs flailed about as he struggled. After more than 10 minutes, he gradually calmed down. His clothes were also dirty and messy. The zombie stood up in a daze and looked at the ground blankly. After a few minutes, his black eyes gradually regained their original luster, but the color of his eyeballs became somewhat transparent. After he woke up, he looked around. Then he raised his nose and sniffed the air. Then lifted his feet and slowly walked in the direction that Lin Xiao and the others left. On the other side, Wu Qingyue pulled Lin Xiao back to the entrance of the cave, where they killed the level 7 gorilla. They stopped 2 kilometers away. Elmar brought number 8 and Summer, the 2 level 1st kings, to carefully approach. Lin Xiao frowned slightly. Even though she was 2,000 meters away from the entrance of the cave, the powerful aura made her very uncomfortable. The dissatisfaction in her heart made her unable to control her aura. She was stimulated to the point that she couldn't help but want to rise up and fight against the opponent. Wu Qingyue took a step forward and stood in front of her, helping her to block the aura. This is only level 8. It seems that the one we killed before made them vigilant, Wu Qingyue said. Lin Xiao said, it was just a guess before. I didn't expect these things to really evolve to level 8. Wu Qingyue couldn't see her expression, but he could feel that her aura was a bit suppressed, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that she was vigilant. At this moment, Lin Xiao indeed had an instinctive vigilance in her heart, because the aura of this creature was indeed very powerful. It was much stronger than her, almost comparable to the pressure from the thunderclouds that Mo Yen created when he went berserk. However, in comparison it was a bit weaker. But what made Lin Xiao feel suppressed was that this thing was too close to her base. After a huge black shadow crawled out from the ground, this pressure immediately formed an invisible wave that spread out. Even in the base that was dozens of kilometers away, everyone could feel it. Qiu Lily was standing on top of the wall, and was the first to feel this aura. Then Yuan Tianxing, Lin Feng, and the others in the base also felt it. Then Ocean City's Xiao Yunlong and Zhou Shihui stopped what they were doing and looked out the window. What is that? Yuan Tianxing stood up from his desk and walked to the window to look out. Li Zheng also seemed to feel an unusual aura, but he didn't feel it as clearly as Yuan Tianxing. What? Yuan Tianxing stared at the dark night outside and said, "There is a very aggressive aura suddenly coming over. That should be the area where the underground creatures appear." There was some worry in his eyes as he murmured, "I don't know what the leader and the others encountered." Li Zheng walked to the window and felt that the aura was even more intense. He said, "The leader and leader Wu are together, they should be fine." Yuan Tianxing's eyes darkened, but he nodded, "They should be." At this moment, Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao both frowned. A trace of uneasiness flashed through their hearts. Especially Lin Xiao's feeling was stronger. She suddenly pulled Wu Qingyue. "Let's go." Then she sent an order to Elmar and the other zombies, telling them to quickly retreat. If Lin Xiao was at her peak, she wouldn't be afraid to fight with this level 8 underground gorilla. But she had a big belly now. She didn't dare to be careless. Wu Qingyue immediately reacted after being pulled by her, and immediately left with her in the blink of an eye. If this female zombie wasn't tied up with him, he certainly wouldn't have any scruples. But thinking that she was tied up with him, he couldn't let go of his hands and feet to fight. Then he could only temporarily evacuate with her. After the two of them disappeared, Elmar and the other zombies immediately turned around and dodged. All of them ran in the direction they went. The huge black shadow climbed out and stood up. It was a full 10 meters tall. After standing up, the aura on its body became stronger. It twisted its head to sense something, as if it was listening or sniffing. Chapter 956. All the mutated beasts within a radius of dozens of miles shrunk and quickly hid their auras before running away desperately. Some immediately hid in their nests and didn't dare to come out. Most of the birds also quickly flew out from the treetops and flew away. Even some of the mutated plants above level 5 quieted down. Wu Qingyue took Lin Xiao and left very quickly. In the next second, when the level 8 gorilla came out of the ground, Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao had already appeared more than 10 kilometers away. Lin Xiao stood still and turned to look at the direction of the level 8 gorilla. She was a little uneasy and hoped that the big guy wouldn't go in the direction of the sentient being's base. Wu Qingyue appeared with her in another direction, not in the direction of the sentient being's base. Of course, he knew that he couldn't appear in the sentient being's base at this time. If he lured the big guy there, it would be over. Elmar and the rest of the zombies were not slow and quickly appeared around the two of them. Only Xiao Liqing's speed was a little slower, and he was still on the way. He couldn't help it since he was an earth element and not a wind element. Moreover, Xiao Liqing was unlucky enough to be targeted again. This time, it wasn't the level 5 zombie or the level 7 gorilla that was staring at him. The 10-meter-tall gorilla sniffed a few times in the air and began to take 2 steps in the direction of Xiao Liqing's scent. Then it lowered its upper body and stretched out its 2 thick elephant-like forelimbs to support itself on the ground. It bent its waist and stomped with its hind legs. Whoosh bang! A huge shadow shot out in the dark night, leaping more than 10 meters high and landing 40 or 50 meters away. Then as soon as it landed, it leaped forward again, leaping another 10 meters high and 40 or 50 meters away. The gigantic figure created a gust of wind in the air, and when it landed on the ground, it shook the ground with a loud sound and dispersed the wind. Xiao Liqing was jumping forward from the top of another building when he suddenly heard a few vibrations behind him. The dangerous aura covered the ground and tightly locked onto him. Looking back, he saw a giant figure leaping towards him from afar. Xiao Liqing's whole body felt like it had fallen into an ice cave. The huge pressure made his face immediately pale. His forehead was also covered with a layer of dense sweat. I've been targeted. Being watched equals dying. Just as his body stiffened and his reaction slowed after being locked on, the giant shadow had already closed the distance between it and Xiao Liqing with a few leaps. The huge sense of impending death made Xiao Liqing quickly sober up. Then, he began to run for his life. On the other side, Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue also noticed the situation. Both of them had a bad feeling. Wu Qingyue was a little anxious, but he hesitated. He really wanted to save Xiao Liqing. With him around, Xiao Liqing's life wouldn't be in danger. However, he still had his fiancée tied to him. With her current condition, it was even more impossible for him to bring her close to the gigantic beast. He was in a dilemma, but Lin Xiao narrowed his eyes and sensed something. Then he quickly ordered Elmar and the other zombies, "Go save them first, don't fight them head-on." Elmar immediately led a few rank 1 monarchs in Xiao Liqing's direction. None of the zombies they brought out this time were wind type. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so troublesome to find a wind type to bring Xiao Liqing along. Bang! Another loud sound. Xiao Liqing looked back and saw that the giant shadow had already leaped more than 10 times in a few seconds. It had quickly caught up to him. At this time, it was more than 200 meters behind him. In a few blinks of an eye, it would be in front of him. Although his heart was full of danger, Xiao Liqing still calmed himself down. At least his boss was still here. Big leader Wu would definitely not let anything happen to him. In addition, there were also the zombies from the base. Xiao Liqing felt that he wouldn't die here so soon. Don't look back. Elmar flashed to his side and pulled him forward. The other zombies immediately appeared, but they only used their abilities to attack the giant from afar. Old 8 was a metal type. His head was still wrapped in gauze, and the shape didn't look right. However, this didn't affect his combat ability. Countless metals around him were pulled out by him. Abandoned cars, various metal objects in the building, and even the steel bars in the wall were pulled out. Then they condensed into a huge steel arrow. With a wave of number 8's hand, these steel arrows immediately shot towards the giant shadow. Roar! The giant underground gorilla saw the steel arrows flying over. It paused for a moment, waved its left arm, and swung its right arm. It swept away the 2-meter-long, 5-centimeter-thick arrows in a few moves. A few missed arrows pierced its body, but they only made a few ding-ding-ding sounds. Then they fell. None of them could pierce into its skin. They could only leave white marks on its skin. After sweeping away the arrow rain, the giant gorilla immediately leaped in Xiao Liqing's direction. At this moment, a huge condensed fireball, with a dazzling red light smashed towards the giant underground gorilla. Four, who threw the fireball from afar, immediately flashed and disappeared in place. This was the most powerful fireball he had ever gathered. After throwing this fireball, he couldn't use his fire ability for the time being. He had to wait for more than 10 minutes. Just now, after 8th brother shot out those steel arrows, he also needed a few minutes of buffer time. Because Lin Xiao's order wasn't to fight head-on, they took turns to interfere with the monster, so that Elmar could gain some time. Boom! Sure enough, the giant underground gorilla in midair couldn't avoid the fireball, and was directly blasted down. But it didn't cause any damage. It only ignited some flammable objects around it. Roar! The giant gorilla rolled on the ground, crushing the flower beds on the side of the street. It stood up and roared angrily. Although these attacks didn't have any effect on it, they prevented it from catching up with its prey, which made it very unhappy. With Elmar's help, the distance between Xiao Liqing and the giant gorilla immediately increased. Seeing that Lin Xiao sent the zombies to help Xiao Liqing, Wu Qingyue was relieved. The hand that was holding Lin Xiao's wrist tightened. He slightly lowered his head and turned to her saying, "Thank you." Lin Xiao replied calmly, "You're welcome." Maybe it was because Wu Qingyue's energy had decreased a lot recently. As long as she had physical contact with him, she could vaguely sense his thoughts. Therefore, she immediately noticed the other party's worry just now. Only then did she send Elmar and the other zombies to bring him back. Chapter 957. Except for Elmar, the other zombies were only level 6 or 5. Their abilities couldn't stop the giant gorilla. After the gorilla was thwarted again and again, it immediately became angry. Its counterattack was also sharp. When it fell to the ground, it was blocked by the mud wall and smashed into pieces with a swipe of its claws. When it was entangled by the wood vines, it could only struggle left and right before it broke. At this time, a figure sneakily circled around the battlefield, following Xiao Liqing and El March. Seeing that Xiao Liqing was temporarily out of danger, Wu Qingyue continued to pull Lin Xiao away. Both of them wanted to see how far this eyeless monster could chase them. However, at this moment, the giant gorilla suddenly stopped. It swayed left and right, then turned around on the spot, and stood there quietly for a while. Then it suddenly turned around and walked back. This time it was walking slowly, not jumping dozens of meters like before. And as it walked, its aura began to quickly converge. Soon it couldn't be felt. Elmar also felt it. She took Xiao Liqing to the roof of a building and looked at the direction of the gorilla. "What's wrong?" Xiao Liqing saw her and asked curiously. Elmar said, "Didn't you feel it? It didn't chase us and hit its aura. The movement also disappeared." Hearing her words, Xiao Liqing immediately felt it. Indeed, he could no longer feel the oppressive feeling that made him suffocate just now. He also couldn't hear the sound and vibration of the giant running. At this time, the closest to the giant gorilla were number 8, Summer and other level 1 zombies. They all quietly watched the giant monster's aura suddenly disappear and looked at it slowly walking back. The strange thing was, although it was big, there was no sound when it walked. Without a sound, he submerged his figure into the darkness of the night, disappearing in the darkness. Asi landed next to Old Six and looked blankly in the direction where the giant monster disappeared. Then he looked up at Old Six in confusion. Old Six looked down at him and shook his head. He opened his mouth and spoke in a hoarse voice. "I don't understand." He didn't understand what was going on either. Why did the big guy that was chasing him suddenly stop? However, they did not let down their guard. Instead, they continued to stare at the giant gorilla and began to move silently in the darkness. However, they were no longer chasing after Xiao Liqing. Originally, the fresh scent of Xiao Liqing was its target for the night, but it wasn't the habit of a predator to give up on its prey. Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyue, who were about to leave, immediately stopped and turned around. It stopped. He also withdrew his aura. A look of confusion flashed in Wu Qingyue's eyes. He asked in confusion, "Why?" Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes and sensed for a moment, then subconsciously shook her head, indicating that she also did not understand. However, he quickly realized that Wu Qingyue couldn't see any good moves right now. He raised his hand and pressed it against her arm, saying, "I don't know." After saying that, she let go of her hand and crossed her arms, trying to guess the behavior of the underground gorilla. The underground gorilla hadn't even activated its berserk state. Why did it stop halfway through the chase? Could it be some kind of scheme? Or did it change its fighting style? Was it preparing to ambush? The other party had withdrawn its aura, so Lin Xiao could only rely on its scent to determine its movements. At this time, Elmar brought Xiao Liqing back to the two of them. She was also puzzled by the giant monster's behavior. "It turned back and didn't chase after us. It's not preparing to ambush us either," Elmar said. Lin Xiao looked at her and asked, "Are you sure?" Elmar said, "Old 6 and Old 8 are still watching over there. Why don't we wait for their report?" 10 minutes later, Asi returned. He stood in front of Lin Xiao and spoke to her. He told Lin Xiao that the monster had indeed returned, and that Old 6 and the others were still watching it. Lin Xiao frowned and muttered to herself in confusion. Why did it give up? Could it be that it couldn't be too far away from the cave? She suddenly asked Elmar, "Where did it go just now? How far was it from the original cave?" Elmar answered, "About 10 kilometers away." Lin Xiao suddenly thought of a problem. When these things came out of the cave to look for food, they would only go in one direction. But each time, they wouldn't go far. No matter how many prey they caught, they would always retreat after a certain distance. The next time he changed his direction, the distance between them seemed to be the same. It seemed like they didn't dare to go too far. Then Lin Xiao thought of a possibility. She said, "Do you think these things don't have a sense of direction? Are they afraid of getting lost, so they don't go far? What if they go back the way they came and follow the scent they left behind?" Elmar was startled and said, "You said they might get lost? It seems possible. If a person was in a pitch-black environment, it was very easy for them to lose their sense of direction. And these underground creatures had been living underground for a long time. Their eyes had degenerated, and they couldn't see anything. Of course, they didn't have a sense of direction in the dark. They could only rely on their 5 senses to sense the scent of prey, or the scent they left behind as a mark." When Elmar spoke, Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue immediately understood what she meant. Wu Qingyue's eyes lit up, and he nodded in agreement. That's possible. Many underground creatures actually don't have a sense of direction. That's why they don't dare to go too far on land. If the scent they left behind disappears, they might not be able to find their way home. But this was just everyone's guess. They weren't sure yet. Therefore, they didn't dare to let their guard down. If their eyes can't work, then they will be more sensitive to scent. I think this is very likely. Xiao Liqing, who had just been a little frightened, had calmed down and agreed. Next time, we can catch one alive and bring it back for research, Elmar said excitedly. Since these things wouldn't go too far on the ground, the danger to the base was temporarily reduced by 10%. Lin Xiao said, "Let's go back first. I don't know the results of the research on the corpse that was sent back to the base." As she spoke, she went downstairs and released a few cars. She held her stomach and got into the back seat of the first car. Wu Qingyue didn't think and followed her into the first car. He didn't feel at ease letting her go too far away from him. If something unexpected happened, he wouldn't be able to protect her in time. This was the outside of the apocalypse. Any danger could appear in the next second. Xiao Liqing got into the driver's seat and watched Elmar climb into the co-driver's seat before starting the car. The other zombies were squeezed into the 2 cars behind. Chapter 958. Xiao Liqing had just started the car and was about to leave, when suddenly there was a bang-dash sound. A black shadow suddenly leaned on the windshield in front of him. Xiao Liqing was so scared that he reflexively leaned back. In the end, who else could it be other than that stupid zombie? What a lingering ghost. And he's level 6 now. After Xiao Liqing calmed down, he immediately noticed something unexpected. He was just level 5 not long ago. Oh, he was level 5 before. But that's still the peak of level 5, it's time to break through. Elmar said calmly. These days, Lin Xiao had fed this guy a cup of energy lake water every day. He had long reached a point. He didn't think that the cup of lake water that Lin Xiao gave him, before she left with her blood, would directly make this guy level up. Xiao Liqing was silent for a few seconds, then raised his hand and pointed at the zombie that was still clinging to the front of the car. He turned to look at Elmar and said, "What do we do now?" What he meant was, "Why don't you hurry up and get him down? How can we drive like this? The road in front of us is completely blocked." Elmar shrugged and said, "He didn't listen to us before. Now that his strength has increased, he won't listen to us." Obviously, she didn't plan to care about this guy. Xiao Liqing turned his head and looked at her quietly. "This is your zombie's business, you don't care. Do you want me to do it? Can I give this guy a shot?" At this moment, suddenly, the zombie that had just leveled up from level 5 to level 6 in front of him climbed onto the roof of the car. Then there was no more movement. Xiao Liqing couldn't help but look at the roof, then turned back to look at the person in the back seat. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, "Let's go, you don't need to care about him. Someone will care." As he said that, he turned his head and looked at the empty seat next to him. With Wu Qingyue's words, Xiao Liqing immediately felt relieved and drove away. He acted as if he didn't know there was a zombie on the roof of his car. On the other side, Qiu Lily felt the strong pressure disappear, and then she let out a sigh of relief. But her heart was not completely at ease. This feeling of being threatened made her feel vaguely uneasy. However, the most important thing for her now was to find the person who dared to inquire about the cultivation base. Qiu Lily carefully sensed that there were no signs of living beings in the safe zone around the base. She then extended her perception outwards. Suddenly, a strange aura flashed past. Qiu Lily's ruby-like eyes lit up, and then her figure flashed. At this time, a few kilometers underground not far from the base of humanity, two figures were fleeing in a sorry state. Why is there a level 6 mutant snake here? This shouldn't be happening. Running at the front, Wang Chong said in shock and disbelief. Cut the crap. If you want to live, then hurry up and run. Luo Yuxing didn't want to talk, but his companion's nervousness would disrupt his judgment and reaction. There weren't many passages in the sewers to begin with. Soon, the two of them stumbled into a dead end. There was only a hole above their heads. The two of them didn't think too much, and could only quickly climb up the ladder. However, as soon as they crawled out of the cave, they saw the shadow of a beast standing not far away. A pair of glowing eyes stared at them coldly. The coldness was no less than that of the huge black snake that was chasing after them. Using his flashlight, he saw a large dog standing there. Its entire body was pitch black, but its short fur gleamed with a glossy sheen. Seeing that he shone the light from the flashlight on his face, Awang immediately opened his mouth, revealing a mouthful of sharp white teeth for them to see. Its eyes! Its eyes! Luo Yuxing's face paled at the sight of the dog's eyes, and he felt even more despair. It was a pair of pitch-black eyes, without the slightest sliver of white. This meant that this wasn't a mutant dog, but a zombie dog. Its height was around 1.2 meters. Its body was more than 2 meters long, and its 4 muscular limbs were extremely intimidating. No matter how one looked at it, it exuded an oppressive and dangerous aura. Bang! At this moment, the entrance to the tunnel behind the two of them was smashed open. A giant snake about the size of the manhole cover slowly slithered out. Halfway through, however, the giant snake suddenly stopped moving. Awang stared straight at the two of them. Under its gaze and that of the giant snake, Luo Yuxing and Wang Chong had lost the ability to move. They could only stiffly stand there, not daring to move. 2 minutes later, a chilly night breeze blew past. Awang silently glanced at Big Black, a hint of impatience flashing through its eyes. Why don't you hurry up and crawl out? What are you doing poking yourself in the hole? Big Black expressionlessly glanced back at its little companion, then continued to stare at the two trembling humans. Do you think I don't want to come out? Cut. Stop. Got. Good. Really? That's right. Big Black was currently stuck in the opening of the manhole, unable to move up or down. At this moment, a strange shadow flashed by and appeared next to Big Black. A mushroom spirit curiously stood behind Big Black, slightly bending over as it stared at its body that was buried in the hole. 2 tentacles hung down from the mushroom umbrella and bent over to support its mushroom head. It looked like a curious baby no matter how one looked at it. This was what Qiu Lily saw when she appeared. After knocking the two unconscious, Qiu Lily curiously looked at the strange posture of the snake and the mushroom. What's going on? Big Black, aren't you going to take your body out? The sewers are so dirty. Don't forget to take a bath. Qiu Lily circled around Big Black and then retreated with a smile. Of course, Big Black didn't understand what she was talking about, but it could faintly understand the first half of her words. After being stuck for so long, Big Black's patience had run out. It shrunk its head back, and its aura suddenly changed. The mushroom spirit and Qiu Lily immediately retreated. Boom! With a loud noise, Dahe's body was pulled out of the cement ground. Of course, its powerful movements had caused the opening of the manhole to explode. A look of understanding flashed across the eyes of the other three. Woof! Awang bluntly laughed, his eyes narrowing and his mouth opening, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Qiu Lily carried the two people and said, Okay, then I'll be leaving first. Thank you, you three. After saying that, she flashed away. Seeing that she had left, Awang knew that its task had been completed. In fact, these three had been playing on Mount Wu. After discovering Lu Jun and Hu Li's actions, they felt that there were two strange breaths nearby. Awang immediately understood something, and immediately brought the other two friends to catch prey. After Awang evolved to the 6th level, its IQ was very high. Moreover, It had recently regarded the cultivation base, Mount Wu, as its territory. If there were strange breaths coming in without the consent of Lu Jun and the others, it would immediately be vigilant. Chapter 959. When Lin Xiao and the others returned to the base, she suddenly removed her invisible state, but she did not remove her distance control with Wu Qingyue. They entered through the gate of the second base. Now that the second base had been built, the guards at the gate were actually zombies arranged by Lin Xiao and Xie Dong. So when these guards sensed Lin Xiao's aura, they had already opened the gate and were waiting for the unfamiliar level 1 leader, sitting on the top of the leader's car. The guards pretended not to see him. After returning to the base, Lin Xiao sat in the office and began to listen to the work reports of Xie Dong, Duan Wan, Shen Yuzhen and the others. Wu Qingyue was in the lounge not far away, waiting for Xiao Liqing to bring Lingling over from Lin Feng's house. With Lin Xiaolu's perception ability, she was able to bring Wu Yueling to play in her house for more than half a month. Lin Xiaolu was already 8 years old, but she was a very sensible child. Especially after she met Lingling and Tong Tong, she could not help but feel a sense of responsibility as an older sister. So in many things, she would help her 2 younger siblings. With her existence, although Wu Yueling began to feel depressed after Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao left on the 3rd day, others would not be able to see her mood. Fortunately, Lin Xiaolu's ability was similar to Lin Xiao's, and she could sense the thoughts of humans. So when Wu Yueling's mood appeared, she would find ways to comfort her. So these days, Wu Yueling could stay here peacefully, although she did not speak every day, and just sat quietly on the side. But with Lin Xiaolu, although she missed her father, she did not feel any fear. Soon, Xiao Liqing took Wu Yueling to the second base to find Wu Qingyue. The moment she saw her father, Wu Yueling immediately rushed over. Wu Qingyue picked up his daughter and looked at her. His daughter's clear eyes were filled with joy, and other than that, there were no other negative emotions. His heart relaxed and he was relieved. Did Lingling miss Daddy? Wu Yueling hugged him and nodded, but she also knew that her father went out to work. She believed that her father would not abandon her, so she could quietly stay at Lin Xiaolu's place. Although when Xiao Liqing went to pick them up, he had already given some gifts. However, Wu Qingyue knew that he had to treat Lin Feng's family to a meal again to thank them. It was a good opportunity to find out why their family had such a good relationship with the female zombie. Wu Qingyue had never forgotten about this matter. Thinking of the indescribable tacit understanding between Lin Hao and the female zombie, Wu Qingyue's smiling eyes sunk. On the other side, Lin Xiao listened to the sudden events in the base. Apart from catching 2 spies at the cultivation base, there wasn't anything else. Investigate these 2 carefully, see what they found, and whether they revealed anything. Lin Xiao frowned. Xie Dong nodded. Yes. Lin Xiao said to Shen Yuzhen, go and pass my order. Tell Lily to increase the security at the cultivation base. Shen Yuzhen nodded. Yes. After Lin Xiao finished speaking, he asked them to leave. Only Xie Dong was left. We'll have to intensify the training of the 3rd Army Corps. But we can't afford to be negligent. We must make them abide by the rules and control their behavior. Those who violate the rules will die. When it came to controlling the zombie army, Lin Xiao's method was overbearing and cruel. He didn't give these level 3 and 4 zombies any room to relax. Otherwise, if these zombies couldn't control themselves and were exposed in the first base, the consequences would be very serious. At that time, the base would not only have internal problems, but also external problems. Xie Dong was originally from the army. Now he was in charge of the intelligence team and training the zombie army. With his current level of 6 zombie, it was a bit difficult for him. Fortunately, there was Elmar to suppress the 3 armies. Understood. Xie Dong nodded solemnly. Lin Xiao looked at him and said, although Qiu Lily and Elmar are strong and have high levels, they know too little. So the army will have to trouble you a bit. Hold on for a while. When the time comes, I'll raise your level. Xie Dong's eyes flashed, but his expression didn't change. He was still expressionless, but his breath slightly fluctuated. Lin Xiao said to him, When one and the others come back, I'll ask Lin Kuei to replace Elmar and let him stay in the base. Elmar will go out and gather the zombies that can be used to expand the army. Now, other than Sea City, the eyes of all the major bases may have shifted here. After all, Sea City and China have fallen out. In the future, the security bases in the country may be divided into two factions. So the strength of their own bases had to be quickly strengthened. After talking about the zombie army, Lin Xiao asked Xiedong to leave. Xiedong was now her most practical subordinate. He was strong and his own strength wasn't weak. But as the number of the army increased, he might not be able to do it alone. So Lin Xiao thought of waiting for little man to grow and her condition to recover before raising Xiedong's strength. Then she brought Jing Yan up. Although Jing Yan's memory was a little fuzzy, she couldn't remember many things clearly. However, she still remembered many of the instinctive training that she had received in the past. She only needed to take a look to know what was going on. Her ability to accept things was also very strong. Lin Xiao could also see that she had also received military training, but for the time being, she couldn't tell what kind of training she had received, so she threw her into the army to observe for a while. After Xiedong left, a figure at the door sneakily stuck his head out and then went back in. Lin Xiao turned her head and saw the person at the door suddenly appear. Then he stood at the door and stared at Lin Xiao. "Why did you come here? Didn't I tell you to stay in the room?" Seeing this guy, Lin Xiao was a little speechless. Although he was modified by her blood and leveled up. But why didn't the stupid aura disappear along with it? This guy no longer stared at Xiao Liqing, but started to stare at her. The reason he stared at Lin Xiao was actually very simple. It was because of the connection in his heart that he was controlled by Lin Xiao, which made him subconsciously submit to her. But this guy's mind kept thinking why he would submit to her? Why was that? Seeing Lin Xiao made him want to hug her leg? Why was that? Why? So, after this guy came back, Lin Xiao sent Elmar to lock him in a room, but now he ran out again. Looking at his face full of questions, it seemed like he had to give him an answer, otherwise he wouldn't leave. Lin Xiao silently had the urge to cover her forehead. "Don't run around, do you hear me? Go back first." Sighing helplessly, Lin Xiao opened her mouth and ordered him. The young zombie subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave, but as soon as he turned around, he seemed to realize something and stopped. The next second, he turned back and continued to stare at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao. Chapter 960. It was tiring to talk to a zombie that didn't understand human language. And this zombie didn't even understand zombie language. Lin Xiao speechlessly looked at the young zombie standing at the door. At this time, Elmar appeared at the door, and when she saw the zombie standing there with his back to the door, she was slightly stunned. Then she walked in and asked, "Why is he here?" Lin Xiao shook her head. "He ran here by himself and refused to go back even when I told him to." Elmar walked to Lin Xiao's desk and sat down, and then looked back at the zombie. Then she turned to look at Lin Xiao and asked, "Then let him stand there?" Lin Xiao thought about it. That guy didn't seem to understand what they were talking about anyway. So she said, "Let him stand." "How about it? How many of those zombies have evolved this time?" Elmar took out a piece of paper and handed it to her. "Here it is." When Elmar came back, she received another task from Lin Xiao and went out again. This time it was to check the zombie gathering area in the west. She hadn't been there for a few months, and the competition there was fierce. This time when Elmar went there, she found that there were no zombies that advanced to level 6, but there were a few that advanced to level 5. There were dozens of level 4 zombies, and a lot of level 3 zombies. So she controlled the hundreds of zombies from level 3 to level 5, and brought them back to the second base. She was ready to gather the third army and start training. Lin Xiao looked at the data on the paper and nodded. Although Elmar's face was very calm, her eyes couldn't help but glance at Lin Xiao's stomach before leaving. She still remembered when she got out of the car, her surprised mood and Xiao Liqing's expression, as if he had seen a ghost. Although she was shocked and subconsciously asked, Lin Xiao didn't answer her. After hastily taking care of everything, Lin Xiao left the office and prepared to go back to the dormitory. But when she stood up, she saw that the young zombie was still standing there, quietly looking at her. Lin Xiao's bulging stomach was immediately revealed when she stood up. When she came back, she didn't let others see it, and after sitting down, the table covered her stomach again. That was why Xie Dong and Duan Wan didn't notice her stomach. Lin Xiao looked at the other's appearance. To be honest, she could only roughly see his appearance. Because he was too thin, skin and bones, the muscles on his face shriveled. Her eyes were sunken, and her lips were blue. Apart from the high nose bridge, the other facial features were somewhat distorted. But with a closer look, one could imagine the original appearance from the current facial features. Lin Xiao took a few glances, and judged that this guy should have looked good before he turned into a zombie. He was 1.8 meters tall. Because his body was too thin, he stood like a bamboo. But he seemed to be long and thin. He looked more than 1.8 meters tall. Come here. When Lin Xiao walked to the door, he waved at him, and then walked to Wu Qingyue's lounge. Before she finished her work, Wu Qingyue couldn't go too far. Therefore, he could only wait in the lounge and take a look at the official documents that Li Yueshan brought him. When Lin Xiao entered, he saw that Wu Yueling had already fallen asleep on the sofa. He was covered with a blanket. Wu Qingyue looked up when he saw Lin Xiao. Are you done? Lin Xiao nodded and replied, Mm. Wu Qingyue immediately put away the documents and put them in the bag next to him. Xiao Liqing, who was next to Lin Xiao, picked up his file bag. When he saw the young zombie behind Lin Xiao, he frowned in fear. He was afraid that this guy would suddenly jump up. But this time, the young zombie didn't stare at him, but stared at Wu Yueling on the sofa. Lin Xiao raised her hand and couldn't help but pull his ear to the side. She pulled his head and said, Don't eat. Then she turned her head and was about to say something to Wu Qingyue. But she saw Wu Qingyue suddenly fall to the ground. Everyone in the room was shocked, and their expressions all changed. Of course, except for the young zombie who just arrived. Leader. Xiao Liqing threw the bag and quickly stepped over to help Wu Qingyue up. Wu Qingyue didn't directly faint, he was still conscious. It was just that he blacked out for a moment, and his whole body was weak. Now that he was helped up, he was somewhat awake, but his whole body was still soft. He let Xiao Liqing help him up, and waved his hand and said, I'm fine. Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes and looked at him, then opened them and said, Let's go to the hospital. She was going too. She originally planned to go tomorrow. Because it was very late now, she didn't know if Lin Hao worked overtime. Then she turned her head to the young zombie following her and said, Go back to your previous room. This time, she directly used her will to control the other party and released her own aura. The young zombie subconsciously shrank his neck when she stared at him like this. But this time he obediently walked away, looking back 3 times. Wu Qingyue sat on the sofa, leaning against the back of the sofa with his eyes closed. When the dizziness in his head passed, he waved his hand and said, I'm fine. At this time, Wu Yueling also woke up. She got up with a confused face and looked at everyone blankly. Lin Xiao said, Let's go to the hospital first. Her tone was unquestionable. Xiao Liqing nodded in agreement. Wu Qingyue was stunned when he heard this, then nodded with a smile and said, Okay then. It's rare for you to care about me. I'll go. Lin Xiao looked at him with a blank expression and said, As a partner, isn't it normal for me to care? After sending them to the medical department, Lin Hao rubbed his forehead and had been waiting for a long time. After seeing Lin Xiao and the others appear, he first looked at Lin Xiao and her stomach, then turned his head to look at Wu Qingyue. Our powerful leader Wu also has a time when he gets sick. Lin Hao said with a faint teasing smile. As a psychic now, there was no need to talk about physical fitness. Except for injuries caused by external factors, it was impossible for him to get sick. Wu Qingyue heard the half-teasing and half-sarcastic words and replied with a gentle smile. No matter what, I'm also a human, not a god. Lin Hao raised his eyebrows and turned to walk to the clinic next to him. Please come with me. The others wait in the office first. Although he really wanted to check on his sister's condition first, his sister just gave him a meaningful look. Lin Hao could only take Wu Qingyue to check first. Lin Xiao and Xiao Liqing were left in the office, as well as Shen Yuzhen, who came to greet them in advance. But at this time, Shen Yuzhen was staring at Lin Xiao's stomach with her eyes wide open. Only now did she notice the strangeness of Lin Xiao's body. Xiao Liqing saw her look, and guessed that this might be the first time she noticed her leader's condition. He couldn't help but look at Lin Xiao curiously. Chapter 961. Xiao Liqing's first reaction when he saw Lin Xiao's big belly was that his leader was cuckolded. Then he saw his leader's expression, as if he was already used to it. His second reaction was, his leader actually became a stepfather. Now seeing that even Shen Yuzhen beside the female zombie leader had this expression, Xiao Liqing inexplicably felt a sense of balance in his heart. At this time, Shen Yuzhen suddenly turned her head to look at Xiao Liqing. Her eyes were blinking, meaning, is there something wrong with my eyes? Why did I see something I shouldn't have seen? Xiao Liqing silently shrugged at her, with an expression of I don't know anything. Shen Yuzhen's expression kept changing, and suddenly looked at Xiao Liqing with a pitiful expression. Ah, there's no hope for your leader. Xiao Liqing silently swallowed a mouthful of blood, and turned his head to look at the direction of the consultation room. Lin Xiao sat on the side, and had already seen the exchange of these two people's eyes. But she didn't care about them, and just pulled Wu Yueling to sit there. Wu Yueling was curiously looking at her big belly, and then reached out to touch it, but didn't dare to. Lin Xiao smiled, and pulled her hand to touch her own belly. Wu Yueling touched Lin Xiao's round belly through the fabric of her clothes. On one hand, she felt it was very novel, but on the other hand, she was confused why she couldn't hear little man's voice. Lin Xiao maintained the smile on her face, and said to Wu Yueling in her heart, because she fell asleep. Wu Yueling looked like she suddenly understood. Half an hour later, Wu Qingyue and Lin Hao finished the examination and came over. Lin Hao calmly said, there's no big problem, maybe he lost too much energy recently, and his body can't adapt to this state for a while. It will automatically adjust in a few days. Xiao Liqing and Shen Yuzhen both looked puzzled. Xiao Liqing turned his head to look at his leader, and asked blankly, lost too much energy? Wu Qingyue glanced at Lin Xiao, and just smiled at Xiao Liqing without saying anything. Just now before he fainted, he did feel that more than half of his energy suddenly disappeared. He could even vaguely feel that the direction of the energy loss was on Lin Xiao, and he already had some predictions in his heart. And after Lin Hao said this, he immediately said to Lin Xiao, it's your turn. After Lin Xiao handed Wu Yueling back to Wu Qingyue, he followed Lin Hao. In the consulting room, looking at Lin Xiao's belly that had doubled, Lin Hao couldn't help but sigh. It's so much bigger. I'm afraid there's not much time left. At this time, Lin Xiao's belly was almost 8 months big. However, Lin Xiao was tall and thin. Although his belly was big, it was not very conspicuous. Plus, she was wearing a loose skirt and a jacket. After letting Lin Xiao lie down, Lin Hao took the cloth with a hole in the middle and covered her stomach. Then he asked her to pick up the clothes from below and expose her belly. After Lin Hao smeared a layer of liquid on her belly, he took the instrument and began to shine it on her belly. He turned his head to look at the image on the screen. In the image, there was a child in the dark shadows. He's grown up. It looks like I'll be able to see my nephew soon. Lin Hao moved his hand on Lin Xiao's stomach as he watched. The image on the screen changed its angle. Lin Xiao lay down, turned her head to look at him and asked, how is the child? Lin Hao said, the child is very good, but this figure. He paused for a moment. Lin Xiao saw him pause, and her heart slightly jumped. She asked him anxiously, what's wrong with the figure? Is there a problem? She subconsciously thought that there might be something wrong with the child's body, like a defect or something. Lin Hao looked at her with a smile and said, what's the hurry? You didn't wait for me to finish. I mean, the child's figure is a bit fat. Lin Xiao. After a few seconds of strange silence, she opened her mouth and said, then? Lin Hao looked at her and said with a profound smile, a bit fat, maybe it's not easy to give birth. So according to a normal pregnant woman, in order for the birth canal to open normally, at this time, She should do some appropriate exercise. Lin Xiao looked at him blankly. Appropriate exercise? Thinking about it, there was indeed something like maternity exercises. But she was a zombie. Did she have to do that like a normal person? Lin Hao looked at her with a strange gaze, then coughed with a strange expression and said, "Cough. The exercise I'm talking about is double exercise. It's good for the birth canal to open." He felt that his words were already very obvious. Double exercise, opening the birth canal. This phrase was already very obvious. However, he ignored his sister's ignorance in this area. Lin Xiao still looked at him blankly and said, "Maternity exercises? Why do we need double exercise?" "Lin Hao," he said, "do you want to have a natural birth or a cesarean section?" Lin Xiao said subconsciously, "I heard that natural birth is good." Lin Hao nodded. It's indeed better for the child to have a natural birth. Because their mother had already become a zombie, Lin Xiao didn't have an experienced person to guide her in this area, so she didn't know where to start. Lin Hao looked at her strange smile, and after a few seconds of silence, he said shamelessly, "The double exercise I'm talking about is for you to find the child's father to do bed exercises. And you have to do it more frequently, otherwise the effect won't be brought out." Lin Xiao. Wait a minute, what did she just hear? Did this bastard want her to find Wu Qingyue to do that? Looking at Lin Hao's smile, she finally knew why she felt that his smile was strange. She had an urge to beat someone up now. Seeing his sister's dark face, Lin Hao subconsciously stood up and took a few steps to the side. He said to her, "Ahem, I'm doing this for your own good. You said you want to have a natural birth again. This child is a bit overdeveloped again. If you don't want to work so hard, then do it my way. Otherwise, when you give birth, it might get stuck. As a doctor, I'm just giving you advice in a good way." Lin Xiao. Although Lin Hao was very unwilling, because this was simply letting Wu Qingyue take advantage of it. But for the sake of the child and Lin Xiao, he could only grab this trace of unwillingness and throw it out. Lin Xiao sat up with a dark face and took a tissue next to her to wipe off the liquid on her stomach. After tidying up her clothes, she said expressionlessly, "Is there any other way?" Lin Hao shrugged and said, "No. Don't tell me you want to do it yourself." Lin Xiao finally couldn't help but throw the tissue in her hand at him. Although he knew that the tissue wouldn't hurt, Lin Hao was a little afraid of Lin Xiao's imposing manner. He quickly dodged and defended with his hand in front of his face. "What am I doing? I'm doing this for your own good. Don't be ungrateful." Lin Xiao said angrily, "Shut up." Chapter 962. Lin Xiao didn't want to talk to him anymore and walked out the door. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped and turned his head to glare at him. "Don't talk nonsense." Lin Hao raised both his hands. Okay. He walked out of the door and returned to Lin Hao's office. In addition to Wu Qingyue, Xiao Liqing and Xin Yuzhen, Duan Wan had also arrived. When Duan Wan saw Lin Xiao's stomach that was different from before, she was stunned for a moment. Then her eyes slowly widened. "Boss." "No, Leader, it's not even been 2 months. How did you get pregnant? You hid one?" Duan Wan was so shocked that she almost shouted out the name she used to call him before the apocalypse. But she quickly changed it after she regained her senses. However, his expression did not change. His eyes were wide open as he stared at Lin Xiao's stomach. Suddenly, something flashed through her mind, and her expression changed. Then, she looked as if she suddenly realized something. "Oh, that's why. I felt that you were a little fat some time ago." Only Duan Wan and Lin Hao dared to talk to Lin Xiao like that. Xin Yuzhen did not dare to say that. From the familiarity in Duan Wan's tone, it seemed like the two of them had known each other for a long time. Wu Qingyue narrowed his eyes and a dark light flashed. Lin Hao was one thing, but why did Duan Wan, who came from the Netherworld King's base, feel the same way? Although this female zombie had been building this base for almost a year, this Duan Wan had only been by her side for less than a year. But her tone was like she had known this female zombie for a long time. What kind of background did this Lu Tianyu have that even he couldn't find out? Lin Xiao looked at Duan Wan expressionlessly before looking at the others. Apart from Wu Chengyue and Lin Hao, everyone else looked puzzled and inquisitive. She said, "This is a divine fetus. Do you believe it?" Everyone. "Are you kidding me?" Lin Hao couldn't help but ridicule. "It's obviously a corpse fetus." Pa! Just as he finished speaking, Lin Xiao, who was standing next to him, slapped him on the back of the head. Lin Xiao glared at him. "How dare this guy make me lose face? Don't always hit me on the back of the head, okay? Every time. You do it without saying a word." Lin Hao shouted out reflexively after being hit by her. Then, he suddenly realized that there were other people here, and his sister was still wearing someone else's body. "Ahem, all right. Both of you have been examined. If there are no problems, go back and rest. It's already so late, I should go home." Lin Hao touched his nose and said. Lin Xiao glared at him, then turned around and walked out. Shen Yuzhen and Duan Wan quickly followed. Wu Qingyue looked at the backs of Lin Xiao and the other two women as they walked out, then looked at Lin Hao and asked, "I remember that you are all from the Netherworld King's base. Lu Tianyu's hometown is in the north, and she has never been to the south before or after the doomsday. Why is he so familiar with you guys?" It was one thing for Lu Tianyu's temperament to change drastically after becoming a female zombie, but he was actually related to the Southern Underworld King's base for so long. If their relationship was so good, why didn't she directly go to the southern base in the past? Why did she stay in High City? And with these people around, she didn't need to rely on men to survive. That's not right, judging from her current abilities. Even if he was alone, he didn't need to rely on others, right? Suddenly realizing this, Wu Qingyue became even more confused. Lin Hao glanced at him and saw that the usual gentle smile on his face had disappeared. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were filled with scrutiny. "TSK, you only found out now that something is wrong? What have you been doing all this time?" Lin Hao pursed his lips and said. Wu Qingyue looked at him with a deep gaze and didn't speak. At first, he was very concerned about what the female zombie did to him before she became a zombie. But later, because of his daughter, he didn't pay much attention at first. Later, after noticing the change in her temperament, he did send Xiao Liqing to investigate. But after investigating for so long, apart from finding out the existence of Lu Tianyi, he didn't find any connection between her and these people from the Netherworld King's base. Looking at this woman now, she really wasn't simple. It was as if she had become another person. He said, "I found out a long time ago, but I couldn't find any clues." Lin Hao shrugged and said, "If she is willing to tell you, we naturally don't need to say it. If she is not willing to say it, then we can only remain silent. You are still in the mood to doubt her identity now. Aren't you concerned about how the child you left in her stomach will be born? This child has eaten too much of you recently." As he spoke, he looked at Wu Qingyue up and down with a smile. "Wu Qingyue, this look shouldn't be referring to a certain aspect of me, right?" He knew that Lin Hao's expression was just for show, and the meaning in his words indeed had nothing to do with a certain direction. But when it came to the child, Wu Qingyue immediately threw this to the back of his mind. "Do you mean there's something wrong with the child?" He narrowed his eyes and asked Lin Hao. "There is. If she's too fat, she might not be able to give birth. So during this period of time, you should seize the opportunity and do more exercise with our leader." Lin Hao said as he looked at him with a look. Wu Qingyue, who heard that his child was too fat and his mother might not be able to give birth, was speechless. He didn't know what expression to express it. What if it was a little awkward? But who was Wu Qingyue? He was a man standing at the top. The awkwardness only lasted for a moment, and it was covered up by a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Why are you so generous now? Didn't you mind that I was too close to your leader before?" He still hadn't forgotten that this guy had the potential to be a love rival. Lin Hao rolled his eyes. His handsome face had an expression that said, "You're thinking too much about our relationship, aren't you? It's not what you think at all, okay? Besides, I'm a doctor. I'm just doing my duty to tell you this. Because you're the child's father. Or do you want to find someone else?" Wu Qingyue's face immediately darkened because of the last sentence. "Impossible." Lin Hao pursed his lips and looked indifferent. "That's right. The two of them talked and didn't notice what Xiao Liqing, who was in the background, was thinking. Xiao Liqing thought, the child is my leader's. Good thing it's not the grassland. No, that's not the problem. The problem is that my leader actually got a zombie pregnant? That's amazing. Wait a minute, the child is already so big, why don't the brothers know? So sad. The leader is full of his own family. Shit, the leader slept with the female zombie leader. He must have slept with her again. Then why didn't Leader Wu become a zombie? Wow, he even dared to sleep with zombies. At this time, Xiao Liqing felt that there were too many questions in his mind, and he felt like his brain was going to crash. Lin Hao continued to smile and said, remember to be more diligent these days. This is beneficial for opening the birth canal when giving birth. Wu Qingyue also replied with a smile. Of course, I will do this well. Thank Dr. Lin. After saying that, he turned around and left. But when he went out, he didn't see the person who should have followed him out. Xiaocheng. Xiao Liqing then came back to his senses. Oh. Chapter 963. After coming out of Lin Hao's place, Lin Xiao was stared at by two pairs of eyes. Lin Xiao walked and suddenly stopped naturally. She turned her head and looked at them. What are you looking at? Yuzhen, go ahead and watch the road. I can't be exposed now. Shen Yuzhen was stunned when she suddenly turned around and spoke. She nodded and said, oh, got it. With her current appearance, if someone found out that the female leader of this base was pregnant at this time, it might be leaked out. It was more likely to cause some unnecessary trouble. Therefore, Lin Xiao had to try his best to avoid people who were not involved in this area. Seeing Shen Yuzhen walk to the front, Duan Wan said, you can still get pregnant? Can your body provide nutrition for the baby in your belly? Duan Wan, who had come to her senses, stared at her belly with a curious expression and continued. It has been at least 7 months, right? Or 8 months. Isn't his growth cycle the same as ordinary people's? Lin Xiao looked at her and said, to be honest, it has been more than 10 months almost. Duan Wan's eyes widened slightly, and then she asked with a gossipy face, who is the baby's father? He can't appear by himself, can he? Lin Xiao turned around and walked forward without saying anything. Duan Wan continued, then Leader Wu has no hope at all. I was quite optimistic about him before. Oh no, does he know that you have been hiding so well? Oh, now he must be desperate when he sees your belly. Lin Xiao, who was walking in front, said impatiently, TSK, is it really okay for you to gossip with such a serious face every time? Can you stop asking? You're so annoying. Duan Wan pursed her lips and said, well, I won't ask. I'll wait for the baby's father to appear. Anyway, he will know sooner or later. Let's see how long you can hide it. Although they were superior and subordinate, they had been comrades for many years and had a good relationship. Therefore, Duan Wan felt no pressure to gossip about Lin Xiao's current situation. When Lin Xiao took Duan Wan out of the hospital through a hidden passage, she immediately got into the car. The irrelevant people in this area were cleared away by Shen Yuzhen and the guards, so no one saw Lin Xiao. After sitting in the car, Lin Xiao touched her belly. He couldn't help but complain. Who asked you to eat so much? You're so fat. It's hard to give birth to you properly. From now on, eat less. When he returned, he had to arrange for Wu Qingyue's accommodation to be further away. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao immediately said to Shen Yuzhen, who was outside the car, later, arrange for Wu Qingyue's place to stay a little further away, but not more than 200 meters away from my place. Shen Yuzhen looked at her blankly. Ah, Lin Xiao said, don't just do as I say. Shen Yuzhen nodded. Oh, got it. After saying that, he turned around and left. Duan Wan was about to start the car, but Lin Xiao asked her to wait. What's wrong? Duan Wan didn't quite understand. The leader had disappeared for almost 2 months. Not only was he pregnant, but his behavior was also unpredictable. Wait a minute. Lin Xiao looked into the hospital. Sensing that Wu Qingyue's breath had left the front yard, he said, let's go. Duan Wan then drove the car away. On the other side, Wu Qingyue looked left and right, but didn't see Lin Xiao, so he asked, where are they? Xiao Liqing shrugged and said, I don't know, maybe they went back first. But this time, why do we have to live in their second base? Didn't we always live in the first base? The second base was the secret area of this base. They were both outsiders. Was it really good to live there? Thinking of all kinds of strange zombies, Xiao Liqing felt a bit depressed. What are you afraid of? They dared to arrange for us to live there. Anyway, we can pretend that we didn't see what we shouldn't see, and shut up about what we shouldn't say. If they didn't live there, the female zombie would live here. Wouldn't it be easy for her situation to be discovered? Then it was better to live in the second base. It took more than 10 minutes to drive from the medical department of the first base to the second base. Soon, they passed through the gate of the high wall. And then Xiao Liqing was a bit confused. They didn't tell us where we're staying. They didn't bring anyone to guide us. So where are we going now? Wu Qingyue said, Go directly to their living area. Xiao Liqing nodded, Okay. After walking for a while, they saw another car following behind them. It should be the female zombie leader, who just came out from the medical department. After arriving at the living area of the second base, they saw that the car behind was indeed their leader's. After parking the car, Lin Xiao got off the car while holding her stomach. Shen Yuzhen didn't know when she came back. Seeing this, she wanted to help her up, but was stopped by Lin Xiao. She hadn't reached the point where she needed help. Seeing Wu Qingyue carrying Wu Yueling, she walked over and said, Stay with me in the same building for now. Send a few more people to follow Ling Ling. This was a zombie area. Although the people who lived here could control themselves rationally, she had to be on guard. However, she had no choice but to take precautions in case something unexpected happened. Wu Qingyue's mouth curved into a familiar smile and nodded. Understood. Shen Yuzhen walked over. I've arranged a room for you, please come with me. Wu Qingyue looked at Lin Xiao, then turned around and followed Shen Yuzhen with Xiao Liqing. Lin Xiao saw that he was looking at her, and there seemed to be a deeper meaning in his smile. She couldn't help but think of the suggestion Lin Hao gave her, and her face darkened. What kind of stupid suggestion was that? Who would sell their own sister like that? Seeing Wu Qingyue's proud face, Lin Xiao felt that she didn't need this guy's help. If it really didn't work, she could just cut her stomach open. Besides, from now on, I'll just let little man eat less. Going upstairs, Lin Xiao told Duan Wan, During this time, if there are any problems, tell them to come to me. I won't be in the first area for the time being. Duan Wan nodded, Understood. Just as the two of them walked up, suddenly a figure jumped out from the corridor next to them. Before Duan Wan could react, he pounced on her and pushed her to the ground. Duan Wan groaned. Her back hurt a little when it hit the ground, but her whole body was shaken and she felt dizzy. For a moment, she felt like there were stars flying above her head. Don't bite. Lin Xiao quickly shouted. Only then did Duan Wan slightly wake up. She saw that the one on top of her was a strange male zombie. At this time, he was about to bite her face. Maybe he heard Lin Xiao scolding, so he stopped. Seeing that Lin Xiao didn't let him bite, the young zombie closed his mouth and looked at Duan Wan with regret. Just when the two of them thought he would get up, the zombie suddenly stuck out his tongue and licked Duan Wan's face. Duan Wan, whose right face was covered with zombie saliva, was speechless. She was dumbfounded. Chapter 964. Get up, Lin Xiao said. The young zombie that was on top of Duan Wan moved a bit and got up reluctantly. Duan Wan came back to her senses when she saw the guy finally got up. However, halfway up, a zombie's knee slipped on the floor. Then it fell to the ground with a bang. This time, because of its posture, its whole face hit Duan Wan's chest. Well, ouch! Duan Wan felt a dull pain in her chest and subconsciously cursed. Why was she so unlucky? Being licked in the face by a zombie was fine, but why was she hit in the chest? Oh, her heart hurt. Lin Xiao sighed and lifted the young zombie up with her hand on the waist. She said to him with disappointment, Can you not jump on every living person you see? Don't eat people in the future. If you want to eat meat, wait for a while, and then I will give it to you. But you can't eat people anymore, okay? If he wanted to eat meat, He could eat mutant meat like Lu Tianyi and others after the virus in his body had adapted. However, it would indeed take a long time for that to happen. The young zombie looked at her with a blank face, and his eyes were full of doubts. What was a person? He didn't eat people. What was a person? What was meat? Although Lin Xiao's blood made this zombie level up, and it was easy for her to control. But this guy's IQ obviously hadn't recovered. Duan stood up with a blank face and stepped a few steps away from the young zombie, with some lingering fear. She retreated to the other side of Lin Xiao and asked while wiping her face, "Who is this? You just accepted him?" Lin Xiao didn't answer Duan's question, but stared at the young zombie and shouted, "Did you hear that? As I said, don't eat people in the future. No, stay away from living people in the future." Then she pointed at Duan to the young zombie. The young zombie then understood. Oh, the person Lin Xiao was talking about was the food. But it wasn't that he wanted to eat, but the food smelled so good. He couldn't help but want to jump on it. Not to mention the food was so close to him. It would be a waste not to jump on it. Answer. Lin Xiao stared at him with cold eyes. Roar. The young zombie was glared at by her, and subconsciously responded. Only then did Lin Xiao put away the coldness in his eyes and said to him, "What are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to stay inside? Go back." The young zombie was a little afraid of Lin Xiao's cold expression and her aura, although he was not very willing. However, he still obediently retreated, but he retreated horizontally. His feet moved, but his eyes were fixed on Duan, who was standing beside Lin Xiao in the opposite direction. From time to time, he would glance at Lin Xiao carefully. "Hurry up and go." Lin Xiao couldn't help but urge him to hurry up when he saw him dawdling. The young zombie immediately shrunk and turned to run. In the end, dong. Duan covered her face with her hands and Lin Xiao helplessly looked up at the ceiling. She didn't understand. This guy was now a level 6 zombie. It was fine if he fell down often. But why did he hit the wall? However, the zombie that hit the wall didn't feel anything at all. He blankly held onto the wall, and then continued to walk forward with a blank face. Only then did Lin Xiao lead Duan up the stairs. When we were near the underground gorilla cave, this fellow appeared on his own. He wasn't afraid of me, Wu Qingyue, or Elmar's aura, and jumped on Xiao Liqing. However, this guy is stupid, and he doesn't have any smell of blood on him. And I don't know what ability he has. I thought it was a little strange, so I brought him back. Duan heard that Xiao Liqing had the same treatment as her, and her heart felt better. She said, "He jumps on anyone he sees. Is it safe to bring him back?" Lin Xiao looked back at her, and suddenly smiled. He didn't touch Xiao Liqing. He was only level 5 before. So his treatment is different from yours. Duan. She didn't want to know this, okay? Lin Xiao continued. Didn't I say that he doesn't have any smell of blood on him? And he doesn't have any hostility. He probably hasn't eaten a living person, or even a dead person. That's why I thought it was strange. Duan's face didn't look good. I was infected by him? She couldn't say that she was licked, so she could only swallow it back. But she remembered that he was a zombie, and his mouth was full of viruses. Lin Xiao smiled. Don't worry, it's fine. Even if you're infected, as long as you're not dead, I can cure you. Duan was stunned, and suddenly realized what she had said. She asked in surprise, "You have a way to cure the zombie virus?" Hearing her question, Lin Xiao nodded. She didn't hide it. I have a way, but only I can do it. She had realized this problem when Lu Tianyi had become a zombie last time. When she had bitten Lin Yu, he hadn't died yet. But Lu Tianyi was already dead. Moreover, if she put her virus on other zombies, her virus source would directly devour the virus source of other zombies. From this point of view, Lin Xiao confirmed this matter from Lin Yu. There was no need to confirm it. Duan slightly opened her eyes wide, and suddenly said with some disbelief, I feel that after you changed your body, you have a lot more skills. You can even do this. Lin Xiao just smiled and didn't say anything. As Lin Xiao's assistant and guard captain, Duan's dormitory was also in the second base. She was the only living person in the second base, and the others were all zombies. But in the past, everyone was familiar with each other, so no one would have any thoughts of eating Duan. But now it was different, because there was a zombie with an abnormal IQ. So when Duan slept in the middle of the night, she suddenly felt a weight on her body. She suddenly woke up, and subconsciously lifted her hand, directly flipping the person on top of her off. Then she quickly turned off the bed and pressed on top of the person, and in the blink of an eye, she pulled the person's hands behind her back. Then she used her ability to seal the person's hands. Who are you? Duan sat on the person's back, and she felt a cold under her body. She knew that the person was definitely not a human. Yes, there were only zombies here. Apart from Wuxia and Xiao Liqing, and a child, she was the only living person. Roar dash, the zombie on top of her struggled vigorously, and the strength was so strong that Duan couldn't hold it down. But when she heard his roar, Duan didn't understand. After all, those who could live in this building were basically able to speak. Why didn't the person speak now, but only roar? And the voice was inexplicably familiar. Duan stood up to turn on the light, and when the light came on, she saw the zombie on the ground. Wasn't it the one that licked her face tonight? You dare to disobey the leader's order? Duan angrily stared at the young zombie on the ground who had struggled to sit up. Chapter 965. Duan was shocked that the zombie didn't listen to Lin Xiao. Generally, when a level 7 zombie gave an order to a lower level zombie, the level effect was very obvious. Why did it lose its effect in the eyes of the zombie in front of her? She looked at the stone lock she made with her ability and locked his hands. She could feel that he was very strong just now, but now she didn't see him break free from the stone lock she made. Wasn't this guy level 6? On the other side, Lin Xiao was lying in his bedroom, holding the energy core of a level 6 mutant beast in his hands, and absorbing it with his eyes closed. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door of the living room. Lin Xiao sensed the two auras outside the door, and put the half-absorbed energy core into the space. He patted the dust off his hands and got out of bed. After walking through the living room and opening the door, he saw Duan in pajamas, standing outside the door with a calm face. After seeing Lin Xiao open the door, he stretched out his right hand, and picked up the zombie next to him. This guy attacked me at night. Do you want to deal with him? Lin Xiao looked at the young zombie, and saw that this guy had his hands behind his back, looking like a little wife. She couldn't help but ask, what happened to him? Duan said, oh, he became like this after I accidentally beat him up. Are you sure he is really level 6? Is he level 3? Otherwise, how could he be so scared after being beaten by her? He attacked you at night? Lin Xiao frowned and stared at the young zombie. Every time he listened to her order, he would forget it. Duan said angrily, why didn't he attack Xiao Liqing's room? Why did he come to my room? Could it be that his room is further away than mine? She wasn't the only one with the aura of a living person. Lin Xiao looked at her subtly and suddenly said, maybe you are weak. Xiao Liqing is at the 6th rank after all. Duan was speechless. She couldn't refute this. So Duan turned her head and stared at the young zombie coldly. This guy hasn't recovered his memory yet, and I don't know if he can remember his name. Let's call him a Geo number 9. Lin Xiao suddenly remembered that this guy didn't have a name, so she gave him a number. Then she turned her head and stared at the young zombie. From now on you will be called a Geo. Let me ask you. I just told you not to eat people. Why didn't you listen? Believe it or not, I'll destroy you if you do this again. As she spoke, she held onto her waist and raised her hand to slap the other party's head. Roar! I didn't eat her. As a result, the young zombie suddenly roared at Lin Xiao. He really didn't want to bite her. He just wanted to lick her. Can I bite it or lick it? This was too much. Didn't you want to eat her? Then why did you run into her room? Seeing that this guy still dared to talk back, Lin Xiao glared at him and scolded. Roar, roar, roar. I didn't. She smelled so good. I just wanted to smell it. The young zombie saw Duan staring at him coldly. He didn't know why he didn't dare to tell Lin Xiao that he wanted to lick her. So he changed his words. Are you a dog? What are you smelling? Lin Xiao raised his hand and smacked the zombie's head again. Duan didn't understand the zombie language, but she could guess from Lin Xiao's reply. But she was very sleepy now, and didn't have the mood to continue listening. I'll leave him to you, I'm going back to sleep. Then she waved to Lin Xiao and left. Lin Xiao looked at her, and was speechless. In any case, she was also her boss. This woman didn't have any manners at all. Not only did she disturb her sleep in the middle of the night, she also brought trouble to her. But seeing that this trouble was brought back by herself, Lin Xiao inexplicably felt that she was reaping what she sowed. She used her breath to call Lu over. Take him to your room, don't let him run around. Call him a Jiu from now on. Since she couldn't leave him alone in the room, then she would find someone else to take care of him. Lu looked at the young zombie, and nodded to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao said to the young zombie, if I see you running around again, I'll dig out your zombie core. Then her 5 fingers turned into claws, popped out sharp nails, and grabbed the top of the young zombie's head to threaten. Roar! The young zombie's body stiffened when his vital point was threatened. Lin Xiao withdrew her hand and said to Lu, take him away. Then she closed the door, and went back to the room. When she turned around, she suddenly saw a man sitting on the sofa in her house. What are you doing here in the middle of the night? Now the energy on Wu Qingyue's body was obviously weaker than before by half. It seemed that his strength had probably fallen to the 6th or 7th level. Wu Qingyue sat on the sofa with his hands crossed in front of his chest. He crossed his legs and looked at Lin Xiao with a faint smile on his face. I heard some movement here, so I came to check. Lin Xiao looked at him with a blank expression. Well, you've seen it. It's not a big deal, can you go now? I won't see you out. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, no, I'm not going to leave. Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes and stood there with her hands on her waist. She felt a little tired standing like this, her stomach was too heavy. So she turned around and walked towards the bedroom. Since you like my sofa, then do as you please. Then she walked into the bedroom door and slammed the door. She didn't care if he entered her bedroom, or what he was doing in the living room. After Lin Xiao lay on the bed, she took out the half-absorbed energy core, and continued to absorb it. Wu Qingyue sat on the sofa, and turned his head to look at the closed door. After a while, he got up with a faint smile and left. At the same time, in a dark room in a certain civilian area of the Sea City base. You mean the land in Sea City can't be used to grow anything? Someone asked hesitantly. That's right. I spent a lot of effort to finally find out about the cultivation base here. Zhou Shihui has been frowning, because the land can't be used to grow anything. He seems to have thought of many ways to experiment, but none of them had any useful results. Another person replied. But then why did they release the news to let Wuxia know that they have this kind of technology? A third person asked, also puzzled. Unless they released fake news, the first person guessed after thinking for a while. This time, Sea City released fake news, in fact, to stop the trade channel with Wuxia. To let Wuxia be greedy, and then do something. Sea City used this as a reason to shed all pretense of cordiality with Wuxia, and then rise independently. But Sea City did have a lot of fresh vegetables recently. If Sea City didn't grow them themselves, where did they come from? Second bro, is your information accurate? Of course my information is accurate. Look, this is the land test report from the cultivation base. As second bro spoke, he took out his phone and showed a few photos to the others. Sure enough, it was the latest land test report from Sea City's cultivation base. Chapter 966. Although Lin Xiao's body was heavy, she still wanted to run to the cultivation base. Looking at the zombies working in the field, Lin Xiao held her chin with her arms. It's only been 2 months, and you're really scary. Lu Jun stood next to Lin Xiao, looking at her bulging belly and said, don't ask anything, I won't say anything. Lin Xiao looked at her indifferently. Lu Jun. Lin Xiao pointed to the mountain and said, I think we should use the mountain as a military base, and let the zombie legion be stationed there for training. In the future, this area will really be a restricted military area, and no one is allowed to enter. Originally, there were still many people in the base who knew the location of the cultivation base. Later, when the second virus broke out, Lin Xiao asked Lu Jun to say that it was a military base, and also used the excuse of a restricted military area as an excuse, and no one was allowed to enter the base. But now that the zombie legion was getting bigger and bigger, in addition to the second base, they had to find another place to make a hidden training ground. Anyway, ordinary people couldn't enter the cultivation base, so it was better to directly use this mountain as a training base. Farming while training, Lu Jun turned his head to look, and didn't have any opinion. He nodded, understood. Lin Xiao walked to the front of the cabin. There was more than one cabin here, and it was unknown when a row of cabins was built next to it, and there was also a treehouse built on the tree behind it. Both inside and outside the cabin were left behind by the zombies. Now the scale of the cultivation base had expanded to dozens of acres. The half of the foot of the mountain, and halfway up the mountain were all dug by Lu Jun and Hu Li. The three of them brought the zombies out, and then used the energy lake water that Lin Xiao gave to dilute the soil here. After solving the problem of the soil infection, most of the remaining plants relied on the water and Logia zombies' abilities to grow. As for the level 3 zombies without abilities, they could only hoe the weeds and plow the land. Lin Xiao stood in the open space in front of the cabin and took out the vegetables that Lu Tianyi usually picked from the space. Although she had recovered a bit of her ability, she still couldn't enter the space. Fortunately, she could still see the situation in the space, and with just a thought, she could communicate with the zombies in the space. Looking at the development of the cultivation base, there didn't seem to be any problems. Lin Xiao returned to the second base and sat in the meeting room to call the higher-ups of the zombie army over. After Elmar, Xiao Lili Xiedong, and the others came in, they first silently glanced at her stomach, then found a place to sit. Now, everyone at the second base basically knew about Lin Xiao's situation, but Lin Xiao didn't say anything. Everyone was curious about the child's father. Who was it that could make Lin Xiao, a zombie, pregnant? Could it be that the man was also a zombie? Lin Xiao pushed all kinds of strange thoughts aside. After everyone sat down, he asked Xin Yuzhen to open the map on the conference table. He pointed at a location on the map with a stick and said, "We've always said that the plantation base is a restricted military area to prevent ordinary people from getting close. Now I plan to establish an official military base there and use the back of the mountain as a training ground for the army. This place will be the first army's base for the time being. I intend to place the second army's base in the area of the underground creatures and station an elite group here. Pay attention to the movement of these underground creatures at all times." Everyone's eyes immediately focused on the location Lin Xiao pointed at on the map. "Are you saying that we should select some of the stronger soldiers from the 3 legions to come here?" Elmar asked. Lin Xiao nodded. "Yes, the area within a 100-mile radius is now a dangerous area. We have no way to deal with these underground creatures. We can only think of ways to take precautions. Based on their previous investigation, these things didn't have a large range of movement on the surface, but they had a large range of movement underground. Now we found 3 exits, and each one is about 10 kilometers away. It seems that the next exit shouldn't be more than 10 kilometers away." Lin Xiao used the stick in her hand to draw a circle on the map, marking out the activity range of the underground guerrillas. But this location was less than 70 kilometers away from the base, so it wouldn't take long for other exits to appear. Lin Xiao now had to be on guard against the direction of the next exit. If it was at the base, then she had to prepare for the worst. If it was in another direction, then it wouldn't be a problem. Xiao Lili had never seen these things before, so she asked curiously, "You said that they don't move much on the surface, why?" Lin Xiao looked at her and smiled. "Because they are blind. They rely on the scent they leave behind to tell the direction. If they walk too far on the surface, the wind will be strong, and their scent won't stay for long." Xiao Lili understood a little. "Oh, so they can't tell the direction, right?" Elmar frowned and said, "But the number of zombies we have is still too little. If we were to take out 1,000 zombies to defend the base, wouldn't it affect the base when there are less than 2,000 zombies left?" Lin Xiao waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about the base for now. Anyways, Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng are there, And the survivors' army is not just for show. Don't worry about this. Elmar nodded and didn't say anything else. Then who will suppress them if we send the zombies over? At this time Chio Lily asked. Since they were going to send 1,000 zombies, they would definitely have to send a level 7 zombie to suppress them. Chio Lily subconsciously looked at Elmarch. Currently, the level 7 zombies in the base were Elmar and Lin Kuei, who was far away at Lake Tai. Since Lin Kuei was no longer around, he would have to choose one of them. Lin Xiao looked at Elmar and didn't say anything. Elmar already said, "Of course I will go, and I am more familiar with these creatures." Elmar was no longer the little girl she used to be. She had learned a lot and matured a lot. She had also matured a lot. Her personality was originally more stable, so naturally, she grew up much faster than Chio Lily. Although Chio Lily was strong, her mind was still relatively naive, and she didn't have a big heart. Her opinions on big things weren't as mature as Elmar's. Lin Xiao nodded. Yes, that's what I think. But Lily, if you want to go out and play, you can go, but don't go too far. Chio Lily nodded. Oh, I know. Lin Xiao thought about it, then looked at Xiadong and said, train the new zombies quickly. Wuxia and Haiqing had a falling out, and I had a feeling that they would start fighting soon. At that time we can't avoid being involved. Yes. Xiadong nodded. Chapter 967. After the meeting with the zombies, Lin Xiao immediately called for an internal meeting in the base. This was the first time Lin Xiao had seen Yuan Tianxing in the past 2 months. Lin Xiao didn't plan to hide her current situation from him. Therefore, there was no need to be secretive during the meeting. Therefore, when Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng came to the second base for the meeting, they didn't pay much attention to Lin Xiao's condition when they entered the meeting room, because she was sitting. The second thing is that I sent a zombie army to guard there. The location is here. It's 40 kilometers away from our base. It's not very far. If anything happens, Elmar will send the news back immediately. Lin Xiao pointed at a point on the map with the stick in her hand and said, it's too simple to make a military base in Wushan. The terrain there isn't complicated. Although there are mountains, the area is too small. And, as Yuan Tianxing was speaking, he suddenly noticed her stomach. His expression changed as he stared fixedly at her abdomen. Seeing that Yuan Tianxing suddenly stopped talking, everyone looked up at him strangely. In the end, they saw him staring straight at Lin Xiao. Oh, don't you know about this? Elmar suddenly looked at Lin Xiao with a smirk. Lin Xiao looked at her, and then at Yuan Tianxing without saying anything. Lin Feng also noticed and said in surprise, wait, she's already so big? It's only been 2 months, right? What did you make her eat? His words made Yuan Tianxing turn his head and stare at him. He moved his lips and asked, what's going on? Lin Feng, do you know? The shock in his heart hadn't passed, but the confusion in his eyes remained. There was a thought in his heart, but he didn't want to believe it. How could she? That must be an illusion. He must have seen it wrong. Or was there something wrong with Lin Xiao's body? But Lin Feng's words seemed to shatter his conjecture. Lin Feng smiled and looked at her stomach. Everyone has been busy recently, and you haven't come out. I didn't expect you to be so big. Are you going to give birth soon? What did Haozi say? Lin Xiao looked at him, and then at everyone else. She realized that everyone had suddenly thrown their work aside, and were not prepared to continue the meeting. From the looks of it, were they going to find out what her stomach was like before continuing the meeting? Can't you all be more serious? She pursed her lips and remained silent. It seems like Uncle Lin already knew about it. Even we don't know. Chio Lily suddenly said sourly. They had only seen it in the past 2 days, and they were all shocked. Shen Yuzhen smiled and said, even I only found out when the leader came back the day before yesterday. Everyone stared at Lin Feng. Lin Feng wiped the smile off his face. He glanced at everyone expressionlessly and cleared his throat. Be serious. Do you still want to continue the meeting? Elmar glanced at Yuan Tianxing, who was still in a daze. She then looked at Lin Xiao and said, actually, I want to know how our leader did it. You're about to give birth to a baby. Who's the baby's father? Yuan Tianxing snapped back to reality when he heard the word baby. He turned around and stared at Lin Xiao. There was a complicated look in his eyes, and he seemed to be hurt and disheartened. Looking at everyone's expressions, it wasn't what he thought it was. Even if he didn't want to admit it, the truth had already happened. The woman he loved not only became a zombie, but she was also pregnant with someone else's child as a zombie. He already had a child, how could he not give up? There was a dull pain in his heart, and it was even worse than when Lin Xiao rejected him. Yuan Tianxing couldn't maintain the expression on his face anymore. His eyes started to lose focus, and his spirit dimmed. Lin Feng knew Yuan Tianxing's feelings, so he didn't say anything. Lin Xiao glanced at Yuan Tianxing and knew that today's meeting couldn't continue. They could only disperse for now. But we still don't know who the father of the child is. Qiu Lily puffed up her cheeks unwillingly and looked at El March. Everyone present didn't know who it was. Lin Xiao rolled her eyes and said, "You guys might find out in the future. All right, let's go. Everyone go out and come back tomorrow to finish today's meeting." She glanced at Yuan Tianxing and then at Lin Feng. Lin Feng gave her a look, then stood up and patted Yuan Tianxing's shoulder before leaving. Duan Wan wasn't in the meeting room. She was guarding outside the door. But she knew Yuan Tianxing's feelings for Lin Xiao. And when Lin Xiao and the others came out, she accidentally saw Yuan Tianxing's expression. "What's wrong with Deputy Leader Yuan?" Duan Wan asked Shen Yuzhen in a strange voice. Shen Yuzhen and Lu Jun were standing together, and after hearing Duan Wan's words, they both looked back at Yuan Tianxing. They saw that he was sitting motionless in his seat, and his expression was a little sad. The two looked at each other, then at Lin Xiao who was walking in front. It's the first time he saw Leader's belly today, so he might be a little scared. Duan Wan's eyes flashed, and she immediately showed an expression of understanding. That's right, Yuan Tianxing had always liked their leader. Even after the leader became the leader of the base, he didn't seem to want to give up. But after coming to the newly built base, Yuan Tianxing started to keep his distance from the leader. Duan Wan thought that Yuan Tianxing had already retreated and started to give up. Now it seemed that from today onwards, he would truly give up. Duan Wan sighed. In the past, she had always felt that Lin Xiao was deeply hurt. If there was someone who could accompany her to the end, perhaps Yuan Tianxing, who was always by her side as the deputy leader, was the most suitable. But now it seemed that feelings couldn't be forced. When Lin Xiao returned to the office, she saw Wu Qingyue sitting on the sofa in her office, reading a document in his hand. Wu Yueling was sitting next to him and playing. Seeing Lin Xiao enter, Wu Yueling immediately ran down from the sofa and ran to Lin Xiao's side. Besides Duan Wan and Shen Yuzhen, the others behind Lin Xiao had returned to their offices. Seeing Lin Xiao return, Wu Qingyue looked up at her. "You finished so quickly?" Logically speaking, the base meeting would take at least 2 to 3 hours. But it had only been an hour. Lin Xiao glanced at him and said, "It's not finished. We'll talk about the rest tomorrow." Wu Qingyue raised his eyebrows, guessing that something must have happened. He thought for a while and asked her, "How do you plan to deal with the area with the underground creatures?" Lin Xiao walked to the desk and sat down. She habitually touched her belly and said, "What else can I do? I can't fight them, so I can only hide." She only knew that her and Wu Qingyue's supernatural attacks had some effect on those creatures. But to deal with these creatures, they couldn't do it in a short period of time. They could only hunt and kill them for a long time. It wasn't convenient for her now, so she could only wait for little Man to be born and recover her strength. She didn't expect Wu Qingyue to help as he didn't have that much time to waste. Chapter 968. Wu Qingyue asked, "You don't have enough researchers here. Do you want me to transfer 2 people to help you?" Although Lin Xiao had sent back a corpse of an underground creature and some wreckage, Lin Hao's research was very slow. On one hand, it was because he was a doctor and was busy managing the hospital and treating patients during the day. On the other hand, it was because research was not his strong point. Lung Xiantong was not in the base now, so Lin Hao would not have any good results even if he was busy. "No need, thank you." Lin Xiao rejected without hesitation and said, Leng Xiantong should be back soon. It was normal for her to reject Wu Qingyue, because she had already asked Xie Dong to send people to find Lin Wenwen's team a few days ago, and let Leng Xiantong lead the team back first. Though the stone was effective in making the metahumans go crazy, the most important thing now was to deal with the underworld creatures. The other things would be left for Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying to deal with. Another reason was that Lin Xiao did not want to owe Wu Qingyue too much. In the past, every time this person helped her, she would return the favor in other ways. But not long ago, she became dangerously aware of her own thoughts and began to avoid communicating with Wu Qingyue. Even though the two of them had been together for the past 2 months, other than Wu Qingyue holding her hand and moving her around, the two of them had always maintained an awkward distance. One wanted to escape, and the other didn't dare to push too hard. Thus, this strange situation had developed. Wu Qingyue narrowed his eyes, and the smile on his lips faded. His expression did not change as he said, All right, since you don't want me to help you, then do whatever you want. After that, he did not say anything and continued to look at the documents in his hand. Lin Xiao looked at him in surprise, thinking that the man would have some other reaction. Could it be that he was already used to this strange atmosphere? Seeing that the man did not say anything, Lin Xiao did not say anything either. She sat at the desk and lowered her head to work. The office was very quiet, with only the occasional sound of writing and the sound of pages being flipped. Wu Yueling did not say anything and returned to Wu Qingyue's side. She was holding her bald rabbit in her arms. In the afternoon, Wu Qingyue brought Lingling back to the house to eat. However, Lin Xiao was still busy. Even after the sky turned dark, he was still busy. When Lin Xiao returned home, it was already past 11 o'clock in the evening. Before he reached the door, he could already smell Wu Qingyue's scent coming from his room. A trace of helplessness flashed in Lin Xiao's heart. This person was really clingy. During the day, he would stick to her office. At night, he would stick to her house. She opened the door and saw the man sitting on the sofa in the room without turning on the lights. Lin Xiao turned on the light and closed the door. She looked at him and asked, What is it now? Wu Qingyue was wearing a black nightgown, his back leaning against the back of the sofa, his sitting posture elegant. At this moment he raised his head and smiled at her. I was waiting for you. Wasn't that obvious? Lin Xiao looked at him speechlessly for a few seconds. After a moment of silence he said, So why were you waiting for me? The smile on Wu Qingyue's face deepened. He looked at her and said meaningfully, You haven't forgotten what Dr. Lin said, have you? I'm here to do my duty. Hearing him mention Lin Hao, Lin Xiao's face immediately darkened. She refused without thinking. Thank you, but you don't need to do this kind of duty. The doctor is just giving advice. He doesn't have to do what you do. Speaking of this matter, she deeply felt like she was sold out by her brother. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao's face darkened even more. She gloomily stared at Wu Qingyue, who was smiling. She seemed to be gnashing her teeth. Wu Qingyue smiled and didn't answer her. He suddenly stood up from the sofa and walked towards Lin Xiao. Seeing his slender figure approaching, the difference in height made Lin Xiao feel that the other person was shrouding her with an invisible pressure. Lin Xiao narrowed his eyes, but he stood firmly and did not move at all. Wu Qingyue walked in front of her, but not very close. There was still a distance of half a meter between the two. He slightly lowered his head to look at her eyes and said, You've already realized it, haven't you? What are you afraid of? Since he went crazy last time, this female zombie's eyes would occasionally become subtle when she looked at him. Although she quickly covered it up, he had already noticed it after a few times. But this female zombie was avoiding this kind of atmosphere more and more. She always intentionally distanced herself from the two. When she was at his house, although she was invisible, he had already discovered that she liked to stand quietly on the side and watch him cook. Every time he pretended not to know, but he was happy in his heart, because this female zombie began to care about him. But the other party's evasive attitude made Wu Qingyue unable to think of any reason. He always felt that the other party seemed to be afraid of something, so she chose to escape. Sure enough, after hearing his words, the female zombie's pupils suddenly shrank. Then she turned her eyes and avoided his gaze. Lin Xiao calmly turned her face away and walked to the tea counter next to her. While walking, she said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." Then she stood in front of the counter and poured herself a glass of water. Then she raised it and drank a big mouthful. Wu Qingyue lightly smiled and said, "It doesn't matter if you don't understand, I can tell you. But running away can't solve the problem. Right now you have an evasive attitude." Lin Xiao looked at the water in the transparent cup in her hand and was stunned. After 2 seconds, she drank the water again and put the cup back. There are some things that you can't avoid just because you think you can escape. It's getting late, Leader Wu, please go back. She lightly said, "I'm not leaving tonight. I haven't finished my duty. This is my benefit. I haven't received it yet. How can I leave?" Wu Qingyue looked at her back with a smile. Lin Xiao turned her head and stared at him with an unfriendly expression. "Don't even think about it. Worst comes to worst, I will perform a C-section. Little man ate so much energy. I think it won't affect her much." Wu Qingyue shook his head and said, "How can you do that? It's healthier for the child to have a natural birth. Even if you don't think about yourself, you have to think about the child. Besides, listening to the doctor is always right. You will suffer if you don't listen to the doctor." Lin Xiao couldn't refute this, and could only stare at him coldly. She angrily said, "Aren't you afraid of becoming a zombie? I can't enter the space now, and there's no lake energy to adjust it. If you dare to touch me, you will become a zombie." These words were completely to scare Wu Qingyue. Last time when this guy went crazy, he kissed her and didn't turn her into a zombie. Thinking about it, even if he really did it, this person probably wouldn't have any reaction. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, "Do you think I'm stupid? Although I don't remember what happened when I went crazy, it doesn't prevent me from finding out what happened. Besides, is there a need to find out?" Then he slightly stepped forward and stood in front of Lin Xiao. He raised his hand and gently touched her mouth. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."